dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas, and I am here alone today. Dan couldn't make it, but I'm here with a much older connection of mine, going back to kind of my earliest roots of being involved in online politics or this online cultural, socio-political sphere, whatever you want to call it. Brandon Adamson is someone I've known since 2018, which for me goes back pretty far, although Brandon's been online a bit longer than that. But Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Yeah, no, really, really good to talk again. We were just kind of speaking right before I hit record about how we probably have, we've been mutual followers for years and continued to interact, but I think this is probably the first time since maybe early 2020. This is basically before the pandemic, I think, that we've actually spoken. So it's good to speak again.
Yeah, same here. I think the last time that we did a podcast is when I was promoting my book before, which was the Rats of Nationalism. So that had to be
Must
like
have
late
been
2019.
Yeah, so. Yeah. And I remember we were talking a decent amount at the beginning of 2020, but I guess maybe not doing podcasts. But yeah, no, Rats of Nationalism, definitely. There's if you go back, so this would be, we met through the Robert Stark sphere, the Stark Truth with Robert Stark podcast, which a lot of listeners to this podcast probably know of, and which is still active, although Robert's more active on Substack these days than podcasting. But yeah, lots of good episodes people can find. Maybe we'll even link them in the description. We have quite a few good ones on Andrew Yang. And we did a really good one on the Groyper War, I remember. Lots of good topics from back in those days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. A lot of those are pretty dated. I think especially when you go back to the ones from the 2015.
Oh man, yeah. Well, that was even before my time, technically. But I know the ones you're talking about.
Yeah, those podcasts should be burned. Most.
You think so? Oh, because I get nostalgic for them, but that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, I get nostalgic sometimes, but like it's just, I don't know. I'm just sometimes like it's kind of one of those things where like anything that you did at one time is almost kind of like cringe when you look back on it now, because it's like we were like very naive at the time and like idealistic. So
definitely. Yeah, and then there's of course the whole, threat of being doxxed for opinions or things that one said at that time. So there's that concern. There's that and that's not cringe, but there's that, I guess, like, concern about things that some of us may or may not have said at the time. But no, I do get nostalgic for it, almost because of the idealism of it. I mean, I think in some ways it ended up being misplaced, but there was an energy about that time, definitely 2015, 2016, which again is technically before I was deeply involved in the online or podcasting sphere. But even like 2018, it was still a time where a lot of us, this was definitely me, were kind of like inventing names for like our own like meme ideologies and stuff, which sounds kind of autistic and maybe idealistic now, but I don't know. It definitely was like very formative for me. So I look back on it with some degree of fondness.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of, I don't know. For me, there's a weird parallel between like the baby boomers and like what I went through, because I went kind of like through a kind of like alt-right or like a dark version of how like when the boomers in the 60s were like very like kind of revolutionary and like idealistic, and then by the 80s they were like just kind of like yuppies, like, you know, voting for Reagan and like driving BMWs and things like that. And there was kind of like, I feel like I went through a kind of similar, like almost like an alt-right version of that, where I was like, you know, really passionate about these, like we're going places, like this is going to, you know, we're going to change the world and all of this. But then like, you know, then I kind of just like grew out of it and you know, just became more of kind of a cynic, almost like a boomer, like
kind of just more cynical about it all.
Cynical and just like a more, I don't know. I guess my mindset just changed. It's kind of like, well, that you can't really beat the system, so you just have to learn how to adapt.
Yeah,
and live within like the way it is, like deal with the world as it is, like.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think you can kind of trace that. You can obviously trace it in your tweets. You used to, well, to back up further, I mean, you used to have, not that, I don't know how to the extent that you want to talk about all of this, but you used to have a great, and this is kind of for the listeners who may not be as familiar with you, you used to have a great blog called altleft.com. I'll just give the 1 to 2 minute like version of the history of that. You know, it was before Trump kind of ruined the alt-left concept by associating it with Antifa and things like that. This was basically like a critical other voice in the room, I would say, during the peak alt-right thing. And it was kind of ideologically not the opposite of that, but rather a take on that. I mean, how would you present it? You know, the sort of more...
Yeah, I would think that,
yeah, go on.
Like, it was just kind of, I would say what we used to be classified as more of kind of the liberal side of the alt-right, as opposed to something like the alt-right was something, it was something different than that. It was more like, just like the kind of, people used to describe us as the left wing of the alt-right. So it was still like within that, a lot of that framework, as opposed to the other stuff that was completely opposed to it. But
yeah,
you know, even before that, I mean, like when I probably at my edgiest time period, I wrote a blog called Xenophobe, which was even before that, and that was when I was probably my edgiest time period. But I just didn't. I don't know. I didn't want to. First of all, like you and I are both like involved in the arts and all kinds of stuff, and so I didn't want to have a blog that was just restricted to talking about one particular political thing. I wanted something that was more like that encompassed, like, oh, you know, sometimes I might write about this, and then in other times I might write like an album review or something like that, or write about some other thing that just has like some architecture or something local or anything. Just like, I didn't want to have something that like where the title of the site just was like, it restricted you to just like this one thing. And I don't know, I didn't want to become like known for that specifically.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And altleft.com, and also this was kind of the peak of the Robert Stark, you know, the Stark Truth with Robert Stark, that we met through, was what very much became that, where it was there political topics were broached and controversial political topics were broached, but also you could sort of talk about anything, and everything would have a sort of dissident slant. But there's a lot of cultural coverage, films, music, literature, and there was also another key ingredient here is, I think, a certain transhumanism, which is also a word that I feel like I haven't heard in a little while. It's kind of, or maybe I'm just in the wrong circles. I don't hear as much discourse on transhumanism, but there's an element of that, I think, to what your work was about back then. I think still is, which we'll get into, which is that transhumanism, or just futurism, even that tying in one's political hopes and aspirations with also technological aspirations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That's always been like I don't know. That's always been like heavy in my writing and a component. Even going back to when I was writing like old poetry books like Side Quests in like 2007 and 2008. Like you're
Yeah.
going really far back. That was always a component to it. I think part of that is also like my generation, I guess, because I'm a little bit older than you, but in
Yeah.
like growing up as a kid in the 80s, like the way that everyone thought of the future, like you know, in the year 2000, 2010, like not now, it's 2023, but like
Yeah.
that it was just I don't know, that the expectations that were had for the future were just like they were so much greater and like more optimistic technology. People always make that meme that's like, oh, we were promised flying cars, and like I never really believed in that kind of stuff, but it was just kind of this you know, this idea that like I don't know, the expectations were much greater, that like
Definitely.
we
There
were
was still
colonies on the moon and things like that. It was just kind of yeah,
there's still a hopeful vision of the future which fizzled sort of through the 90s, although I think you're a big fan of the 90s, and I think a lot of us have a degree of nostalgia for the 90s as well. But then definitely like post War on Terror, it just seemed like that future was canceled. And I think that's always been a big part of your aesthetic, but also probably your politics too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't know, I've always like, and but also just kind of I've always kind of had an issue with a lot of this kind of like back to nature kind of stuff, like going backwards kind of thing, or like, you know, only eating organic food, or and all of the stuff that you see is very like very anti-technology, which is interestingly, it's been like it's been absorbed by like the dissident right and the far right, which is like they're kind of which is interesting to me because, like I said, because I'm a little bit older, like the kind of views that I see that these people have, like in these nationalist circles, it's like I don't know when it happened, but it's like in 2004, like Gwyneth Paltrow ideas are now like what the far right, like
Yeah.
it's like, you know what I mean? Stuff
Definitely,
that like people like Rush Limbaugh used to make fun of and stuff like that is like, you know, these old weird like, and even with like a lot of the I don't know, a lot of the medical kind of stuff and like the new age medical and homeopathic stuff that like
seed oils.
yeah, that like, I mean, that when I was growing, like Republicans would have made, you know, they would have laughed. That was like just some like weird like Northern California like hippie bullshit, and now that's like kind of like taken as that's been absorbed into the dissident right, and it's kind of like I don't know, but I've never been of that mindset. So
You're a much more positive take on futurism, and that's reflected. I mean, I want to get into your poetry soon, and definitely in your books. And one specific one that really captures, I think, that vision of the future was your, I guess, 2 books back now, A Sky Train to Nowhere, which I looked at again in the lead up to this podcast. Really good book about the sky train that travels around Phoenix's airport, and you just kind of sat on this and meditatively wrote out thoughts, but it very much reflecting the sky train as emblematic of this kind of future that we could have had type notion. I think in that, you talk about the 80s too, I think one poem that stood out to me on another reading of this book this past week was I think you even mentioned that you think this fixation on things like sky trains and that kind of futurism in general was probably ignited in 1986 at Disneyland, at Tomorrowland, right?
Yeah, for me anyways, like I went to Disneyland in 1986, and yeah, the Tomorrowland and all of that was like I don't know, it was just so incredible to me that it just left a really big impression. And also just like a lot of the movies and whatnot at that time, and I wouldn't even say that it's like I don't know, it's just kind of like the advancing of things, and I never have that's always just really resonated with me. Like I've always been like excited about new inventions and and things like that. I think there was a time period when I was like 6 or 7 years old that I wanted to be an inventor when I grew up.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but that's basically the way. And it's not even so much like a from the political standpoint, it's not even so much like an optimistic vision of the future. It's more like, okay, well, like this stuff is going to be here, so you can either like learn how to benefit from it and use it, or you're going to be like left behind and like subjugated by it.
Exactly. Yeah.
For the people who learn to use it, it's kind of like when people complain about like a lot of like Silicon Valley like tech stuff, and it's like, you can complain about that, you can like whine about it and say that it needs to stop, or you can be like, okay, how do I get in on this? Like, how could it benefit me personally? Like,
and there's that notion. Yeah, go on.
I mean, that's just kind of one of the ways that I'd say my mindset has kind of been and also like evolved.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because I was gonna say, just I was getting into this, like you can trace sort of your trajectory from being much more politically engaged and idealistic to where you are now, which is much less politically engaged. You can trace that sort of in your tweets and in your output. These days you're tweeting a lot about going to Starbucks and going to the mall, and then kind of like more cultural type thoughts, I guess. So you can there's a certain moving away from the politics.
I mean, there's no like, I mean, I wouldn't even say that I had like some kind of like a change of heart or anything like that. I basically just lost interest, and there are a lot of reasons for that. And one of the reasons, which I've always found frustrating, and I feel like has gotten worse, the dissident political subculture is just like, I mean, it's just kind of like a garbage dump now, and it's always been frustrating for me because it's always like they try to funnel you into choosing between these different factions and groups of these figures that like I just don't have any interest in, so it's kind of like, and you see these things like online where it's like, oh well, if you're not part of like Bronze Age perverts crew, then you must be like with Nick Fuentes or like some other rival thing, and it's just like, no, like I just don't have any interest in like any of these people really, and like to anybody who's listening, like if you're like part of these groups, like it's fine, I don't care, like I don't have anything against these people, but it's just kind of like I don't want to be like, oh well, if you don't like this, if you're not a Wignat or something, then you've got to listen, you must be like part of like Red Scare or these other groups, and it's like, no, I don't have any interest in any of these. Like most of the figures and things that like I thought were interesting and compelling, those people are just not around anymore, or they're marginalized. So it's kind of like I'm just not that invested. I'm not invested in any of these people, and that's one reason. And another reason is just and I'm sure that I know that you've dealt with this to some degree, but just the amount of even for someone who's like just kind of a periphery figure like me, the amount of just like stalkers and like creepy people and just totally deranged people that I've had to deal with like over the years, and some of them are like like fans, not even necessarily like enemies or anything like that. But just the amount of stories I have of like creepy stalkers and just people like weird people contacting me and stuff, and at a certain point you just have to think like, well, I don't want to write about this stuff because this isn't like, if I'm attracting these kinds of people, like I'm doing something wrong.
It's a difficult thing to navigate.
So and even like, I don't know. I mean, there was that incident that you and I had a few years ago, which with that, and then there was also like there was something like more recent where these people were claiming that they claimed that I was in that there were these like group chats or something dedicated to like harassing women or something, and they thought they were calling me the ringleader of this or something, which is like,
No, it's insane. Yeah.
yeah. And if you know me, like, I mean, I would never even join a group chat, let alone
Yeah.
be,
I
be
hate
the
group chats.
ringleader of something.
Yeah.
Like, I hate them, and like, I don't like. I'm a very like kind of standoffish person, so I don't really like. I just avoid that kind of stuff, and I don't know. It's just like, and I would just have like these like random women like contacting me. So I don't know, like if there was somebody like impersonating me, like doing this stuff, and I just would just have these people like contacting me like angrily, like all over the place, like even on sites like not on Twitter and things like that, just emailing me, and I was
Yeah.
just like, and it was all complete nonsense. Like I didn't even
Yeah.
like I didn't even have any interest in any of these people, and most of them like I either didn't know who they were or like just barely that like maybe had like replied to a tweet or two like a year or two ago or something like that.
Yeah, no,
But
you do wonder if they like had the wrong person or something. But it's just there's this quote from a musician called Burial that I really like, and I actually may put it in my next book as like an epigraph, which is he was asked in an interview about responding to negative and insane comments online, and he said something to the effect of like I try not to go online. It's like using a Ouija board. You let random people into your head, and it can feel that way sometimes in like that very creepy sense.
yeah, and I don't know, like a lot of people are always like worried about like Antifa and things like this, but like I found that the creepiest people are the ones who kind of they might start out as fans, like that are, and you just kind of like they will they get creepier, or as time goes on, and what happens is like, and this because you're a writer too, is that
Yeah.
like they kind of start out by like praising you, like, oh, I like your book, I like this post that you read, and so it's like it makes you feel like obligated, like, oh well, this person is like I've got to let this person in because they're a customer, I've got to like
Yeah.
engage with them and stuff, and then like it just gets like I don't know, I kind of learned the hard way that it's just like you just can't um you just can't do that. Like you just got to be like, cool, glad you like my book. It doesn't mean that like we're going to be friends or something like that.
Yeah,
And you're
you
going
have to have your guard up a little bit.
so I don't know, and I think there's too many people, and this is kind of why I checked out a little bit. There are too many people on that want a lot of attention, like in these
Hmm.
dissident circles, and so I was kind of like getting to like past the point of no return, I guess, when you get into that thing. And if you look at all of these like accounts and people that are like that are have gotten extremely popular or something, their lives are just filled with like drama and like just pain. I mean, it's just kind of like just the amount of, I mean, if you look at just these figures on Twitter, if you just look at the ones that have like more than the ones who were around back in the day and like had like a similar level of I don't know, notoriety as
Hmm.
me, maybe like some of those people now that have like 50,000, 100,000 followers, like they're constantly like being doxxed and having like videos of their family members posted and things like that, and just the most kind of like deranged and like sociopathic and like sadistic thing, like, and you just have to really want to be in the limelight really bad
Yeah.
to subject yourself to that. And like I had things before where I had like, I mean, I've had like Antifa like posting my family members' addresses and things like that back in the day, and it's just kind of like not that big of a deal, but um like why would you, I don't know, why would you do it, especially if you're like somebody like us. So some of these people that are like maybe they're paid operatives or something, or they have some
Yeah.
kind of financial backing for whatever um ideological thing that they're pushing. But like MFs like you and me that are just doing this shit for free, like just out of pure passion, like
Yeah.
we're just chumps, like
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to navigate though, because as you said, kind of in a different section of this conversation, like there's all these terrible things about being online and what can happen. But it's also like you have to, like, this is the reality now, and we have to find ways to adapt to it. So you almost have to find like a balance, because it's like, I think it's really good to check out from a lot of stuff, but then as a creative person, you still want to have some kind of outlet. And whatever that ends up being, whether you keep doing a podcast or even just tweeting about going to the mall and going to Starbucks, it's still, you still build up a brand, and it's good. I'm glad you're still with us online.
Yeah,
Despite all this. Yeah.
I think like one of the reasons that I don't leave is that it's just I feel like if I did leave, that somebody would just like impersonate me and start like doing weird shit. So I at least have to maintain some kind of presence. And I don't know. Also, like I've too have been struggling with a way to I don't know, adapt to that and find a way to like promote myself without dealing with deranged people. I guess the way that I've decided to do it is just like, I think the way that smart people do it is you just get like, you get other people to promote your work for you. And you just kind of like, I don't know. I think if you look at somebody like Boyd Rice, or something like people like, he's not out there like, he has like Instagram, but that's it. He's not out there like really getting engaging directly very much on all of these different.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So I don't know. So that's the thing is like, so look, sometimes I wish that I didn't have to like have a locked Twitter account and I could just go wild and like, shill stuff and just get like as many followers as I could get. But I just like, I don't find it to be like, it's just more
the cost benefit analysis doesn't work out. And I mean, I think even for people who don't necessarily, whether they're just not talking about as many hot button issues or whatever the case might be, like even people who aren't dealing with weird people online and doxing and things, it's still kind of just this thankless task to engage in promoting yourself too much. So especially as a creative person, I think you have to find the right balance of as you said, kind of finding other ways to get other people to promote it, or also just like, I don't know, when you make something, you want people to read it, obviously. Like, I don't want to sort of like shy away from that. But at the same time, I think there's also a power in just like making something for yourself and kind of throwing it out there and hoping people like it. I mean, I don't want to sound so naive. Obviously, you got to find other ways to get yourself out there. But in the ideal world, the creators, the artists who have the best sort of setup are able to do that. I think a lot of the most significant artists and, writers, artists, musicians, I don't think they're on social media all day. I think they're focused on their work and are able to put it out in that way.
Yeah, I think so. And I've always had this kind of problem, which I don't know, maybe it's a problem, maybe it isn't, is that like when once I finish something and like release it, I'm just not very interested in it anymore. So it's hard for me to continuously promote, because I've like gotten it out of my system, like whatever was in my mind or like
exactly
whatever inspired me. So I don't have, so that's kind of like that's also why I've never really spent much time pursuing like traditional publishing, because when I first started out, like I kind of looked into that and it would always say like, oh, like we publish your manuscript like 1 year after acceptance or something.
Right,
I'm thinking like a year, like I'm not going to give a shit about this after a year after I make it. Like I might, I don't want to like wait a whole, like it's like, so that's the main reason I like using my own publishing imprint and things like that, is because it's like if I finish editing something on like a Friday night or something, like the book is out on Monday. Like it is, I'm not like waiting 2 years. Some of them would say like we publish manuscripts 2 years after acceptance, and especially with this other stuff, like a lot of the stuff is kind of like it's topical, it's contemporary. So like in 2 years, it's not going to matter. And like I've had a lot of people steal my ideas and things like that over time. So it's like when I'm working on something, it's like I need to put this out before somebody steals it or something like that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, listen, I shouldn't even say this because it's like friends of this podcast, but and this is actually not a bad thing. But even smaller publishing houses like Terror House, like Matt Forney's
Yeah.
publishing house, which I published my book with. So this is not to say anything bad about it, but just talking turkey, like for people who are deciding whether to publish with a small publishing house or go for a bigger publishing house or self-publish, even Terror House, it's about a year. So
Yeah.
it's like
And like I understand like why they have to, if they're, especially they're publishing a lot of stuff, they have to focus on one thing
yeah,
at a time.
it's not their fault. It's just it's an inevitable part of what it is to be a publisher, and we needed to have publishers for centuries, decades. Like that was a necessary part of getting a book out there, but it happens to not be anymore. So I think there is a strength in just putting your own stuff out on completely on your own terms.
Yeah, and so like other people would sometimes say like, oh well, that's like if you don't have like a real publisher or something, it's not. But like they don't get it. It's like for me, it's just like I don't want to wait a year for something to come out like after I finish it. That's really what it boils down to. Like not for any other reason. And also the money too is like a lot of like indie publishers like.
Yeah, you're not going to be getting much. Yeah,
because like they don't necessarily they can't necessarily do much more for you promotional wise than you could do yourself.
Yeah, they're looking for people who can promote themselves.
And like if you promote yourself, like you get to keep all of the money versus like getting a slice of like something of that's where you're not even going to sell that much more. If
exactly. Yeah.
But I could be wrong about that because some of these.
It depends. It depends on the publisher. But listen, I think a lot of us are kind of strained to read it all, unfortunately, if we have jobs or whatever. So it's like people are very selective about their books. And at the end of the day, just because there's a publishing house behind it doesn't. I mean, it can help with some connectivity, and it's kind of a status symbol for a lot of us. So it's understandable. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but getting your book out on go on.
Well, and also the like a lot of these books that are with these indie publishers, they kind of end up like out of print very quickly, whereas like I don't have to worry about like rights and things like that. If I like want to if I want to make sure something I wrote 10 or 15 years ago is still in print, I don't have to go through any hoops to do that. I just make, it's still available. It's not like some of these books from like The Dissident Right from a few years ago, they're already like out of print and they're like just completely disappeared, like impossible to find. So
no. I think there's a lot of advantage. I mean, I have I'm going to. I don't want to misspeak, but pretty much certainly going to be publishing my next book this year, and I probably will end up self-publishing it. There's a couple people I was talking to, and I still wouldn't mind having the clout of like getting a slightly bigger publishing name behind it, but or even just maybe to avoid using sort of more the. I mean. So I don't necessarily want to self-publish through Amazon. Like I'd rather find like a smaller press or something. But at the end of the day, like it's gonna I'm gonna hit a point where it's like I just want to get this out there, and I'll do whatever it takes. Do you self-publish yours with? I know they're available, of course, on Amazon, but I don't think that's the printer you use necessarily, right?
I mean, I've used like a bunch of different ones. I've experimented with different ones. I feel like Amazon is actually the best one just because it is it's the most efficient. Yeah, like I've used like Lulu and some others, but
right. Lulu's tough. I know Stark publishes those books with Lulu, but it's kind of a harder people have to actually go to the website there and they're like unfamiliar with the website. It's kind of streamlined through Amazon.
I don't know, it's just kind of like the Amazon is just the easiest and it's the best, and it's also like for me anyways, it's the most it's become the best because they've dealt with so many like complete morons that like they're kind of like prepared for any contingency. So it's it's just very easy to do it because like they really like have it down to like a science.
That's good to know. Yeah, because I remember I was helping Stark publish his last book, Vaporfornia, and I was kind of impressed with how difficult I found it to format the book correctly and everything. And we were using Lulu, so I was not looking forward to that if I end up publishing with Amazon, or if I end up self-publishing. I wasn't looking forward to that, but it's good to know that's a bit easier with Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I used to use Lulu. I think I used that for like
Skytrain, right?
Yeah, I think I used it for like two books, and then Side Quest, when I wrote that was like through a company called Wasteland Press, which
that was quite a while ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that was like 2008 or 2009. If you go on like Amazon, it says that it was like came out in 2015, but that's like that's a lie. All I did was just like I remade the cover or something, and then it just had like a new but the book originally came out in 2008 actually.
Yeah.
So it was like it's the date is wrong on Amazon because I like corrected some typos and made a new cover, and then so it says that it came out in 2015.
Right. You had a book even earlier than that, right?
Oh yeah, the Gleaming Crest.
The Gleaming, that was from like the 90s or something even.
Yeah, that was written in like 95, and that was written when I was in high school and stuff. In
Oh,
the early,
dang.
and some of the poems from that were actually published in like national magazines like I know Plasm magazine and stuff. And that was a really big deal for me because like I was in high school, and to have like poems that were published in a magazine that was like for sale at the mall. You know, it was like you go to like B. Dalton or something, and they would have it there.
Oh yeah, that's sick. Yeah, no, I have I think Stark has a copy of Gleaming Crest that I read and enjoyed. Well, I remember what I thought was cool about it was that it's still, you still kind of write similar to that. Like you haven't not to say that you haven't improved or anything, but like it's just a kind of a similar.
I hope I
definitely improved, but there's still a similar aesthetic even back then.
Yeah, like writing poems about like eating cereal and stuff like that. I mean,
Exactly.
Definitely. Yeah, there is, but those poems were written when I was in high school, and I think when I was like a senior in high school, I was really into acting, and I was in like, and I kind of like, I don't know, like junior and senior, I kind of LARPed as like a sensitive poet or something like that. I went through a phase of like that where I was kind of, I think a lot of like writers and poets like kind of start out that way, whereas like I thought I wore like a turtleneck, and I had that kind of that 90s like long kind of angsty like like Boy Meets World kind of haircut.
Oh yeah.
Like, so yeah, I don't know. Like senior year, I kind of like LARPed as a poet, and so that's why like in some of your like the early poems and stuff on the Gleaming Crest it's kind of like I wrote about stuff that like I just imagine poets would write about, like with like poems like The Lonely Beach and things like that. They're just kind of like and even the title of that book itself was The Gleaming Crest, which was just something that had like a grandiose kind of poetic feel. It doesn't even really mean anything, And it was the original title of that book was going to be Blight Colors, and I don't know why I changed it. I think that it just I think that I ended up using the title of that for a song I made later called Bright Colors That Fade. So I didn't use it. Right. But yeah, anyway, the Gleaming Crest, written while I was in high school. It's like painfully dated, even references like a couple of like totally forgotten like 90s like commercials, like a commercial for Aptiva like computers and things like that. Like,
well, that's what I mean though. I feel like that kind of cultural reference is like still kind of finds its way into your world aesthetically. So there is that. I don't mean that there hasn't been improvement. It's just that there is that linearity back to it, which is
and
cool.
That is also like a very kind of, I think that's something very kind of late Gen X about that, is like a lot of people don't understand that like as an 80s kid, like our lives were basically just consumed with like television commercials and like Saturday morning cartoons and things like that. I mean, commercial jingles, and it's just kind of like, I mean, it was just so deeply ingrained, like the kind of 80s like childhood consumerism, which like, probably like horrifies a lot of people, but it's just something that is just like um it's just so deeply ingrained.
Right. Well, you used to. This was a more political, I guess, incarnation of Brandon Adamson. But your Twitter byline used to be NutraSweet Nationalist. This was before the Perfume Nationalist, who I think you used to be like good pals with. I don't know. This is kind of a similar thing there, where it's like kind of a culture, and we talked about it with Stark too. Like,
Yeah.
like just a kind of nationalism or a kind of nostalgia combined with futurism, but that's like very rooted to like a non-traditionalist sort of 80s 90s thing.
Right, like a
really
artificial sweetener that was like, like all the rage in the 80s, and that, but now is kind of like, not seen. It's like looked upon negatively or something. So yeah, I did think that NutraSweet National or basically like, I was like, I had an 80s mom, so I was like raised on like Diet Pepsi,
Coke.
Diet Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my mom was into like aerobics and like leotard, the shoulder pads, like the whole thing. Like my mom was basically like she was like a character like on the show Dynasty, basically.
Yeah.
With like just the very like stereotypical like 80s 80s with like Diet Coke in the fridge and all of that. I don't think my entire time growing up, I don't think that we ever had like regular soda like in the fridge once, like not even once, not even like 7-Up or something. I mean, it was just like it was diet soda like from till the time I was 18. So I never like so yeah, that was kind of that was part of it.
It's funny. My mom used to drink Diet Coke as well, and we didn't really have any other soda in the house, so I kind of grew up stealing that. But always I'd steal it from her because she didn't want me to have any of it. But I'd still like steal a glass here and there, and I didn't like it as much as I liked regular Coke. But now, I not even just because of the health thing of it having no calories, but I really prefer Diet Coke to regular if I'm going to be drinking soda. I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I still drink it. Like, I don't know. I don't drink as much of it as I did at one time. And there was also like a time when I was like, I went through this weird phase when I was like maybe like 23 or 24, when I don't know, where I felt like I don't know, like that my appearance was going downhill or something like that. I wasn't looking good anymore, and I thought like, everything went downhill when I moved out and I stopped drinking Diet Coke. So maybe like that's the key, And I started
the elixir of life,
like, because I like hadn't been drinking like caffeine or like, and I'm like, well, maybe like it's because if I start drinking this stuff, then I'll look like I did when I was like 16. I'm going to start drinking this stuff again and like doing all the same stuff. And so I don't know, I kind of like subconsciously, I kind of kept it that way. And I think on a subconscious level, I still think that way, where it's like, if I'm drinking a Diet Coke, it's like, I'm a kid again. Like the moment I open one of these things up.
Yeah, no, completely. It's making me want a Diet Coke. Yeah, no, like, yeah, so the trajectory, not that this was necessarily on my outline, but we're talking about it. Like the trajectory of your life was you kind of you acted a lot in high school, wanted to be an actor, had a kind of sensitive, attractive image you were trying to portray. You moved to Los Angeles, right? And then
yeah, I was in a couple of commercials for Gap, which like one of them
I've seen that, yeah.
One of them you can still find online. The other one I've never been able to find. And like I was like I don't know, I was in an extra like in a few movies, like a Kirsten Dunst movie, things like I worked on that for like many days, and I had like an agent out there. I didn't like, I don't know, I just didn't I didn't really like acting. Like when I was very good at acting actually, but I didn't really like it once I was actually like doing it, because I didn't like how I don't know, I was just too self-conscious about it, and I didn't like the way that it was like, it was very scary to me that it was like people would like, you had no control over it. Like people were just filming. There's like a huge camera in your face, and you're just like, I can't just delete this if I don't like how I look. Like somebody's, it's going to be
Yeah.
a thing or whatever. And I don't know. I didn't like the way that I looked that much, which is kind of like, I don't know. Looking back, it's kind of absurd because like I was probably like kind of in my prime then, but I was just kind of, I used to think like, oh, what's going to happen is I'm going to get in this like on a show or this movie or something, and all of these like people from high school or whatever that I want to impress, they're not even going to be impressed. They're just going to be like, wow, he looks like shit now.
Oh,
That's
well,
all
yeah.
I think. So, and it was like, it was untrue, but I just kind of, it was something that was like,
Makes you self-conscious. Yeah.
yeah. So that's why I was like, I don't know. I was more into like making music and things like that because I could just make it.
You have control over it.
Yeah, I have control over it, and also like it's like even if other things going down, and I feel this way about writing also now, is because it's like you can write everything and it's not you're not under like a microscope for you don't have to like maintain like your appearance 100% and all of this other things like the way that you'd have to in something that's much more visual.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I also have this in common with you. I guess I was very into acting in high school, never really pursued it in college, and certainly not past it. And I actually, so I live in Los Angeles, and like I still sometimes wonder, like, should I have tried that more in some capacity? Because I don't think I was bad at it. But I do think that would get to me. I think acting is a profession where if you're a really good actor, a really successful actor, who can kind of pick their own projects, the most successful actors eventually are able to even produce their own projects. That's amazing, but it's kind of a profession where if you're at the top, you're really at the top, but then there's like this huge sort of middle class and lower class of people acting professionally where it's this creative profession, which is great, but you have such little control in comparison with literally any other kind of art. You could, for the reasons you said, it's the camera, especially in TV and film, but also even probably with if people who act in theaters, like you really don't have control. It's like one of the most blue collar sort of artistic professions, and it's very, very difficult and competitive and all these other things. I know a lot of actors out here, and I don't envy that lifestyle at all. It's really hard.
Right, and also like even when I like what I learned from just like being an actor like in a small capacity was that like growing up you had the like almost like kind of like this glorified image of like actors, and I don't know, but then when I like would actually like be on these sets and things like that, I realized that like the actors, like they get yelled at, they're like kids at school. They're not even, they're not like these like, totally like glorified things. Like, maybe somebody like huge, like Tom Cruise or someone like that. But like, for the most part, it's just like, you're just like, you're treated low. Like you get somebody yelling at you constantly, like, no, don't stand like that. Don't do that. And it's just kind of like, they're clearly not like, they're actually like, almost being used, and it's really like the producers and like the directors that are like really the big shots, not just like and you even see that now too with a lot of like the kind of the Me Too stuff that is just like it's almost kind of like pathetic, that these people are just like passed around and just kind of used, and they have to like basically kind of like subject themselves to all kinds of like abuse and humiliation to do this job, and so they're like, I don't know, it's kind of
pretty bad. It's like it's a pretty bad scenario, and like what was I gonna say? There's this people have a notion like, oh, you can kind of hit it big, but you really can't. A lot of the most successful actors now, I'm not even like I'm not even like trying to insult the actors, but a lot of it's like nepotism, and like you can have a series. Like I actually like Lena Dunham's Girls, for example, which now it's kind of an old show to even reference. I think it's a good show. I think it's interesting. but like, yeah, her parents were, had connections and whatnot. Like, it's
Yeah, and you know
yeah,
this as like as someone who lives in Los Angeles. I like very much discovered this like when I started living there, that like every single person is like the son of some or daughter of somebody important. So like
exactly.
even
Yeah.
if it's like some small actress or something, and you think that like you know her, like her dad or something, like he might not be like a household name, but it's like he was the screenwriter for a famous movie or something like that.
Yeah.
They all have something like that. Like I remember knowing a girl, and you would like her dad wrote Revenge of the Nerds, or something, or like
Yeah. And like,
somebody like
even if no one cares about that movie anymore, that person still knows people, and it's like a very insular club. And by the way, I don't even mean to say this. I'll add the caveat. Like, I understand this is just the way the world works. I don't necessarily think
yeah
Hollywood is like ridiculously more nepotistic than the rest of the world. It just is a rather small and elite community of people who know each other.
yeah, or it's just kind of like it's also this kind of thing though, where it's like people think like, oh, this person is like they really like paid their dues and made it. What, like, this person's so talented. But whereas like if you live there, it's like, yeah, they kind of are talented, but like they got the job because like their dad was a casting director or something like that, or a producer or something. Even like a really good actress like Zoe Deschanel or something. I mean, her dad was like Lawrence Deschanel, who was like a famous cinematographer that did like Braveheart and all of these classic movies. So it's like,
Yeah.
um, you know,
No.
this
Yeah. Go on.
these people are basically like groomed for that, like from a very early age. And if you're just coming in from like nowhere, um or something like that, like it's it's much more difficult. It was actually seemed like it was actually easier than most people think, but I think that's just because for me it was just the age that I was at. I mean, like the first time I ever even like auditioned for anything, I got it. So I was like, oh, this is be smooth sailing. But like, I think
Yeah.
that
Well,
if I was there like now trying to do that, like at my age or something, like I would just be like, I would be up shit creek. It just so happened I was like, I was like 20 years old, and I'm like, oh, what are you talking about? This is hard. Like I got like auditions all the time. I got like getting callbacks for everything, and so forth. Like,
yeah.
um,
Well, you can definitely like you can get those roles. I just think there's like a whole sort of like not underclass is a bit of a harsh word, but yeah, basically underclass of actors who like they get the work, but they're never gonna sort of transcend that middle ground of like the best you can get as like a series regular role or like a recurring role on a TV show is kind of like the holy grail. I just you don't see a lot of people sort of transcending out of that to the point that they're really getting good theatrical roles or movie roles or like certainly not they're not going to get the shows of their own. Like it's you get what I mean? It's like there's kind of a closed system of like, yeah, you can work on this low level as an actor, but there's no like if it was a regular type of job, what they'd say is like, oh, there's no upward mobility.
right. And I think also that one thing that's different from the time that I lived there is that because of the way that the internet has exploded and like streaming and so forth, that like Los Angeles isn't really the epicenter anymore for that. Like you have people who are just like the people on these shows that are what like, there's so many of these kind of like shows that they're just not that big anymore compared to like some of these YouTubers that are like these streamers and
Yeah.
stuff that are just like in like bumfuck USA or something. Like some of those people have like millions of subscribers. They're like super famous compared to so I think that kind of like superseded what Los Angeles, because when I was a kid, it was like either you lived in like Los Angeles or New York, or like you had zero chance of really doing anything entertainment wise that would ever get any kind of notoriety. But now that's not the case. I mean, you have all of these people like
Yeah.
PewDiePie and all of these kind of like just random streamers, and even like the political streamers that are just fucking huge. I mean, some of these people are just they're from fucking like some small town in South
Yeah.
Carolina or something like that. And they got like a million subscribers or something like that. So I think that's one thing that has definitely changed, is that Hollywood is no longer like this kind of prestigious place that's just the epicenter for all entertainment and everything. It's kind of like, it's kind of went downhill a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah, it's no longer at the epicenter. People are able to audition remotely. It's a very different scene here now than it was when you lived here. But anyway, we could probably keep going on that and maybe we can return to it. But I definitely want to talk about your new book, Atlantean Wavelengths, which came out at the end of December of 2022.
Yep.
It really enjoyed it. Great book, great little volume of poetry. So we talked about The Gleaming Crest and Side Quest, which were, I guess, your first two books of poetry. You have a few more since then, just to kind of give the context here for listeners. You published a great book called Beatnik Fascism in 2016, which as just conceptually still looms large in my mind. We talked about Skytrain to Nowhere. That was 2018, I believe. Rats of Nationalism isn't poetry, but you published that the next year. And this is your first book back. I guess you've taken a few years between Rats of Nationalism and this, but what sort of called out to you? Well, I guess before I ask that, I'll kind of read this little blurb from Amazon. You describe Atlantean Wavelengths as a collection of nimble ruminations that channel the time-bending, fate-defying energy of the lost continent and collects a few bittersweet souvenirs along the way, which is a pretty apt description. What sort of called out to you to write another volume of poetry?
Well, I don't know. Like, for one thing, I have other like unfinished works also that I started after 2018. I was starting another book in that time period that's like still unfinished, which was another poetry book. And then I started making Atlantean Wavelengths in early 2020 because I don't know, I wanted like a volume of poetry that was kind of more timeless and kind of exotic, and wasn't tied to really anything political or something. I wanted to write something that was like kind of like a classic, in a, like almost like a kind of a timeless.
Yeah, with a lot of allusions to mythology, certainly.
Yeah, mythology and like astrology and just kind of like exotic scenery and things like that. Something that was just more, I don't know, more poetry oriented. That wasn't like, I don't know, it wasn't really tied to contemporary politics or even like, like contemporary living or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was just kind of more ethereal. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
So that was what.
Yeah, go on.
That was what originally started, and I started writing it, and then through the course of writing, I didn't really like have any idea, like, I don't know, like what kind of direction that it was going to go in or anything. I just knew that was the kind of book that I wanted to write, and so I kind of I started writing it in 2020, which is like, it's weird to think that like, this book is only like 35 pages or so. So like, why does it, how can that take years to write? But it's like, you can,
no, I get it. Yeah.
You can set something aside for a while and you come back to it. And it's also like, I don't know. It's kind of a lesson I learned is that like, you need to like not make something long just for the sake of like having a book that's over a certain length or something. Like you really got to like, it's better just
especially
to like,
with poetry, you got to distill, these are distillations of feelings, right? And aesthetics.
Yeah. And it's like, and it's also like, it's like, you really need to make it compact because, what I learned from my previous books is that if you have like one or two like bad poems in there that are just kind of filler, like that's people are going to remember, or they're going to point to and be like, oh, this sucks or something like that. So you really just can't have any, because Beatnik Fascism, for example, like it had a number of poems that were bad, but at the time, like those were just kind of filler poems to to contribute to the mood, or to give it some of the more beatnik flair, that they're just kind of just a few things that were just filler in there that just kind of contributed to the overall ambiance. But that would be the thing that people would point to and be like, well, there are definitely some bad poems in here, or something like that. So I don't know, it was just kind of like, I came to this conclusion that I just would like, I'd rather than try to stretch something out or keep something in there that I like regret having in there later. It's just, I don't want to like torture myself in that way. I'm just going to make it compact, and it's just like, okay, this is whatever. It's like 37 pages. So that is what it is.
No, well, as I said, I like how compact it is. And I think it really, the meaning of it, the overall, not like message in a moral sense, but what you were trying to convey with it, I think really comes across. We can get into that, but you were saying something, you can finish.
Yeah, well, like I said, I started writing it in 2020, and then I didn't really have a direction where I knew it was going to go, or like, what thematically, like what the narrative was going to be, or something like that. And then, so it's very interesting because it lasted like such a long period of time. You can see kind of my trajectory almost within the book itself, because I had like started dating a girl like early on when I was writing it. And so you have like poems that relate to that, like when I started dating, and then like when the relationship was like over, then I like wrote the rest of the book, and you can see the kind of, it gave the narrative like, I don't know, it gave me the answers I was looking for to write it, because it was like the book lasted basically over the course of this relationship that I had been in at the time. And so when it was over, then like the book was over, the era was over, and it was like, that was, what, I don't know. I think that, that probably makes sense to you. And you can see how almost like the trajectory of it within the book itself, if you're like paying close attention to it, even though like the poems aren't necessarily in the order that I wrote them. Like you can still sense like,
it's a sense of a sense of some loop of time kind of closing, for sure.
Yeah. And so that's how the book is. And it's even like, when the beginning you said it shows that it's like, oh, you dedicated to a certain girl. It doesn't mean that it's like really dedicated to this person. It's just kind of an acknowledgement that like this was a particular era, a particular time, that this was this particular era. And when the era was over, the book was over, and it's just kind of acknowledging that like, okay, well, this person did inspire some of these things to be finished, so I have to like give credit where it's due,
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah, well, you have that poem in there, Sagittarian Girl, which I assume is related.
Yeah, it was like I started I started dating a girl, and I like, when we first started dating, like I wrote this poem called Sagittarian Girl, and like, and like my astrology sign is a Cancer, so
right.
That's not a compatible sign with a Sagittarius. So like,
is Cancer, is it it's not a fire sign, obviously. What type of sign is Cancer?
It's a water sign, I believe. The
the Cancer and Sagittarius are not, no mesh?
No, they're not compatible. But so when I initially wrote that poem, it's interesting because like I kind of like, that was like right when I started hanging out with this girl, and the poem essentially like predicted the entire trajectory of everything. Like that was the way that it happened.
Yeah.
So like 2 years later, you can look at it, and it just like, I mean, it just aged like fine wine, because it was just like, wow, I wrote this the first week I was hanging out with this person or something like that, and it's just like spot on.
Holy shit, yeah. Well, because the stars, it's like it's written in the stars. That's literally the idea, right?
Yeah, and that a lot of people who are familiar, or like who know me from political writing or something, they're looking for like very like political subtext to this book, because and they find that because that's what they're like looking for, that's what they're expecting. But really, like what the book is really about, though, is just this idea. It's more of a romantic book, but I guess you could say that there is a, even if something is like non-political, that it is, that in itself is a political kind of.
That's kind of my read on it. Yeah.
But you can say that, like, I mean, what it's really about is just this idea that, like, in the world, the contemporary, like the harsh world, like you're basically like you're on your own. You know, that's just the way. Like you're on your own, and like, you need to come to terms with that and like adapt and like thrive and just like fight and just be. You know, you just need to have the will to survive and adapt in like a very harsh contemporary world, and you're on your own. And like that is like, that's really, if there is a message in the book, that's like, that applies to a lot of different things, but you know, that's just the way that I feel is the mindset to have, even if you know, even if I don't like certain things about how our economy is run and stuff. It's just kind of like, well, you know, people can complain about BlackRock and like Peter Thiel and all of these people, and it's also like, you can be the person who says that, like, oh, you know, all of this stuff is awful, like what can we got to stop it and all this stuff. Or you can look at it and be like, okay, well, like, I need to figure out what like BlackRock is investing in so I can get in on that. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know, so that's kind of what, I don't know. That's in essence, that's what the book is about, and it's also about the like the will to, you know, and this is almost where it gets kind of just the will to almost like defy fate, you know, to just to and yeah. the consequences of, you know, the concept. You can't have a book where you talk about, like, you know, having the willpower and the tenacity and like the resourcefulness to defy fate without also, like, it's just kind of cheap to give that a happy ending. Like you have to point out like what the consequences are of that, like
taking that stance, of being that kind of outsider fighting the odds. It has its consequences. Yeah.
Right. And it's like you have to acknowledge that it's like that it's painful, you know, and that, like, but you just still do it. Like you still, like, kind of in the, you know, not to give it away, but just the last poem where it's just kind of like just really like struggling to just tread water against the current, like just stubbornly, you know.
No, I mean, listen, I don't want to spoil the poem, but I do find the last line of the book very poignant. If I could read it or not, you tell me.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't read the whole thing on here, you know, but I mean, you can if you want to.
Listen, I just really like the line. I'll take this out of the recording if you don't want to, but the last line, and just gives you a flavor for what the whole book sort of leads to, is the last line is, an empire destined to be submerged, waiting for the divers.
Right.
Which I like a lot. Yeah.
You know, and people have, like, I don't know, read into that various things, but essentially what it means is that, like, you know, that people will I don't know, will basically you can attempt to do these great things, and you stubbornly try to push through and succeed and really defy fate and, like, the known laws of nature. I don't want to say the laws of nature, because, like, I don't think you can really defy those. It's just you just discover new boundaries to them, basically. Mm-hmm. Like, but it's like you attempt to define those, and in the end, like, what happens eventually, like, you know, Atlantis sinks, you know, and you end up drowning, you know, you die, you drown, you die, but you're waiting for the divers because, like, you know, you're the mindset, the mentality will survive, and it will need to be found by somebody else who's willing to try.
Exactly. Well,
Right.
that's what Atlantis is. That's what, you know, the Atlantean wavelength is that sense of being someone who is in some way very civilized, right? Who in some way is in touch with this spark of sort of civilizational energy, but also being in a world where that kind of spark is sort of snuffed out, or I mean, I don't know how you describe it, but it is a very memorable image of, you know, the Atlantean. If in your book, there's a very memorable image of, you know, the Atlantean as someone who's, you know, born in today's world, just naturally atomized, because it's the Atlantean wavelength, like that Atlantean spark, is not something that exists in your view, and I tend to agree, you know, in any community of people on Earth, but rather is just something that you can find in individuals who then have to find sort of each other. Is that a fair sort of take on it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, in other words, it's not like a widespread mentality, especially in this age that we have now of like I don't know, like populism and all of this kind of like a lot of back to nature kind of stuff and traditionalism and things like that. You have to find these kind of I want to see like these eccentric dreamer types who still believe this, and sometimes you see them in like the Silicon Valley tech people that everyone hates, you know, or some of the new things, or just the you know, just various kind of types of people that we don't live in a world where that is the ethos right now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you really have to, and it may not even be that is like you know, that may not be, even throughout history, that's not necessarily a default or common mentality to have. And you could have written the same thing 200 years ago or something, it would have had the same, somebody out there would have had the same sentiments. So I don't know, even if you take someone like Elon Musk or someone who like I'm not really a fan of or anything, but you just take an example of like, you know, his rockets exploding or something. He's just like determined to get to Mars or something, even though
there's something
most people would be like, what, you know, why do we need to go to Mars? Who cares? Like, let's just like, you know, sit in a field and eat weeds or something, and just, you know, like play the flute or something like that. I mean, that's that's an exaggeration, but not
really, but not much of one. You know, there's this mire of sort of modern life that most people are just sucked into, and I do think it's hard to find people who have that spark of something higher. I mean, I really kind of responded to that right away while reading Atlantean Wavelengths. And if you don't, I don't want to do this too much. If you don't mind, I really like from the first. I read the last line of the collection. I really like a line in the first poem, just a few lines that I will read, that I think sort of captures this idea. You write, "The descendants of Atlantis can be counted among our own, though few and far between, as a lost civilization's genetic, aesthetic, and psionic remnants." And that's kind of, for me, at the heart of the collection, is that sense of being a particularly attuned kind of person, looking for counterparts in a world that you know, very much does not, that is very smothering to that kind of spirit. Yeah.
And I would, you know, I would say that's spot on. And like, also like one of the inspirations for writing the book is that like when the myth of Atlantis, right, was that like I was always interested in, but it always kind of annoyed me that it was like, oh, that Atlantis would like, this was like the bad guys. This is like a metaphor for like how not to be or something like that. And it really kind of, I don't know, kind of irked me. There was like there's this publication called The New Atlantis or something like that I remember being interested in, because I thought like, oh, this sounds great, you know, the New Atlantis. But what it was all about, it was like anti-transhumanism and anti all of this stuff. And it was about like a warning that like the US was, that we were becoming like Atlantis, and then we were headed for a fall or something. And I'm
Yeah.
just thinking like I was hoping that it would be like a pro Atlantis like
Yeah.
mindset thing, and it wasn't. And it also kind of irked me because it's like I don't get the sense that we live in like a new, like I wish, like
Exactly. Yeah.
I wish like that we were still trying to, in some ways you could say almost that like the like post-war like 1950s America was like
Closer to that.
had much more of that spirit, with all of the rockets and like the moon landing and all of these kinds of things, and just like the building of great cities, and just the real like I don't know, just the real attitude and everything like that. So it's like, I don't know, it just kind of irked me that there's this publication called The New Atlantis, but it was like I was hoping it wasn't like, it was like anti.
Right.
Like,
No,
everything.
it's an annoying and I think very misguided tendency on the right wing and among conservatives. And unfortunately, you get it a lot with even post alt-right and dissident right people now too, which is where they levy the totally inaccurate criticisms at the powers that be, at the establishment. They criticize it for things that are both not true and that actually, like, it would be better if they were true, almost like this kind of thing you're
Yeah.
talking about. Like, no, they're not, I mean, one example, and someone like Bronze Age Pervert even talks about this, is and I agree with him on this, like any kind of Pizzagate obsessions. Like, you really think that all these people are engaging in like weird sex rituals? Like, I mean, Pizzagate aside, because that's obviously supposed to be pretty heinous, but like, I wouldn't give them that much credit. In short, like, I don't think there's anything interesting sort of sexually going on up at the top. I think it's much more sclerotic than that. And then, so that's just a silly metaphor, but then also with bigger picture things like transhumanism. I mean, there's not that energy. Like, I guess what I'm trying to boil this down to is a misguided thing on the right is accusing the left or the establishment of doing all this nefarious stuff with this secret energy that they're keeping from you. And I actually think that's all nonsense. Like, it'd be better if there was that kind of energy, and instead it's something much more sclerotic.
Yeah, I agree, and it's something where it's just kind of like, I don't know, like you see that a lot with like the Clintons, where it's like, like Hillary's just not that interesting. I don't know,
Yeah.
she's not, you know what I mean? They're not like, I don't know. Yeah, the establishment that we have is not like this. It's not this really like hyper futuristic, like transhuman, like idealistic transhumanist thing. It really isn't. Like, it's like, like Bill Gates trying to feed children in Africa or something like
Exactly.
that. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, so.
Oh, for sure. The Atlantean spirit is very, very different. Just to refresh my memory, the Atlantean myth is what, they were giants, right? And they got to sort of
well,
technologically, yeah.
They what happened is they were like, it was like a very like technologically advanced kind of empire, and then what happened is they started to get like, I don't know, they started to get too big and like defy the gods or defy nature or something.
Yeah, it's like the
that.
Tower of Babel story, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they had to be but it's kind of like, to me, a lot of those kinds of narratives, and this is like why I kind of reject a lot of like biblical stuff also, is that it's almost like it's meant to control like the average person. It's meant to teach them a lesson, like, don't try to go get above your station, just be happy with
right
with God. And I find that like in a lot of like religious belief, whereas I feel like it was kind of meant to
it's what Nietzsche would have called slave morality, not to get name droppy, but yeah,
or just as a means of pacification. It's kind of like, don't worry about like material gains or anything. Like, your reward is going to come in the next life.
Exactly.
So just be happy like working out in a field and like, eating dog shit or whatever. And it's like, not so much that, but it's like, don't worry about your suffering, like, or like, don't worry about, getting this or getting, like, your reward is going to come in the next life. It almost just it reminds me of like what, I don't know, like a CEO or something would say to like his like warehouse employees.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
you know what I
precisely.
mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, don't
Yeah,
worry,
well,
like, you're going to be rewarded, you know, eventually, you know, or something. You just learn how to, because I used to work for this company also that they they subscribe to this like this creepy kind of ideology called the fish philosophy.
oh God, this
Um,
sounds terrible. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like it was basically when you had to do like seminars and this stuff, learning about it, and then basically all it was just like, you know, teaching you to like love your job and like
Ugh,
learn how to
yeah.
make you know make the most of your job and stuff like, and it was just kind of like, but it was a way to be like, well, no, if you want me to love my job, like pay me more money, you know, like
No,
I
exactly.
not, you know, like it was the way like instead of paying me more money, you're just going to teach me this philosophy on like why I should be, you know, having a shit-eating grin on my face every day at work and just like loving it, loving every minute of it or something. It's
Yeah,
like,
dare I even ask what fish had to do with it, or do you even remember?
well, because it was based on this like popular like fun kind of business in Washington that was like it was like a fish place where like these like, I don't know, these employees, they would like have so much fun like tossing fish to each other or something. A fish market basically, it was like a fish market job is where it originated. You can read about this and you can see some critiques about it, but it's kind of like, and this is where it's saying when people are like, oh, you know, don't go for material, it's like, no, if you want me to be happy like working for you, then like, you know, pay me more money or like give me more the tangible benefits, not this like this abstract bullshit where it's just like teaching me to feel good or something about what I'm doing, like
Yeah. No,
so
completely.
you know, whatever. It's like what then
Yeah.
that Jerry Maguire, you know, like show me the money, you know,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
um,
this notion of being sort of against that mindset, I think, has been a kind of perennial theme in a lot of your work, both in terms of political and transhumanist stuff, but also your poetry. I immediately, when you were talking about how a lot of these Christian and other, not even just Christian, but other morality tales often deal with you know, normal people getting put in their place for getting too big for their boots. I remember in A Skytrain to Nowhere, you have a line because we know Icarus did nothing wrong. It's definitely, I guess, a theme of yours, which I really appreciate.
yeah, because like, you know, that was the myth of Icarus, that he like he flew too close to the sun, you know, and they get like, so he had to get his like, you know, the wax on his wings melted and he fell.
He died, yeah. But no, what was I gonna say? Yeah, no, it's another thing I remember, Brandon, from like kind of this was probably on Robert Stark's podcast back in the day, but you mentioned I think in like Sunday school, was it? Like from an early age when you were kind of exposed to like the Roman mythology and the gods, like it was like obvious to you that that stuff was a lot cooler than the Christian stuff.
It was just like it was just more compelling to me, and like and even like, I don't know, like aesthetically, and part of that is also like I went to Catholic school and it was just very I don't know, I always thought that this stuff like, oh, you know, turn the other cheek, and that stuff was just like so cheesy, like, oh,
Yeah.
you'd have to be like a complete fucking, you know, chump to go
Yeah.
along with that, whereas like, and even like when you talk about like Icarus, it's like, yeah, he flew too close to the sun and like, you know, and he fell, but it's like somebody had to do that to like see where the limits were that you could go, like constantly pushing the limits to see like, well, how far can you fly, how high can you fly. And so it's like that also, like when just like a, you know, Elon Musk, or says the rocket exploding or something like that, there's who like, you know, your rocket exploded, but it's like, okay, but like,
At least he launched it, yeah.
yeah, somebody, you know, somebody had to see like how, like what the limits are, like how, you know, how high could you go, or what. So it's kind of like, and that is kind of like he falls, but then like, you know, you're waiting for maybe there's going to be another person who tries and who's able to get a little bit higher,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
So
Yeah. Well, I
um
sort of already asked about this, but was there a specific moment, you know, 2019, 2020, when you kind of realized like that you were going to be writing about Atlantis and this notion of Atlanteans? Um,
um
a specific moment, so I don't know, because I think it really works as a theme.
No, not really. There was not like a specific moment. It just kind of grew out of. Well, I guess I guess I should get into that a little bit. Whereas like um, so originally the book was called Little Mallets,
Yeah, and
and
there's a poem called that.
and
Yes.
it was kind of weirdly inspired by like a small like a small chapbook that somebody sent me, which was like who you would remember this person, but he's completely forgotten now, which is Patrick Doyle.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Wait, do you know how he's doing?
I mean, I have no idea. He disappeared off the
He
face of
did.
the
I
earth.
tried to look him
I
up the
kind
other
of,
month. I couldn't find anything
yeah,
about
like,
Patrick Doyle. I think I
you
have.
know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I know the chapbook you're talking about too. Keep going.
yeah, it was called like Little Caligulas or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I had that printed out somewhere. Yeah,
And so I don't know. So originally I was like, writing this book called Little Mallets, and what it was like essentially about was like a mallet, like a hammer, and it was just kind of about like um these different poems would be like working different things out in your problems, basically hitting them with a mallet and
yeah.
and working them out. So I don't know like how it evolved into that. A lot of it was just like I it just kind of morphed into that because that was only like one single poem, Little Mallets, and um, just expanding from there. Somehow it morphed into like an Atlantean
Well, I think I can
theme.
see the connection in a weird way. Keep going.
Yeah, and I have like I don't know, a lot of the poems I write and things like that are like I tend to write like while one of my like creative things that I do are basically um I tend to watch movies that are thematically like related to whatever I'm writing about. Like while I was writing
Yeah,
Beatnik Fascism, I was watching a lot of like beatnik themed
yeah,
movies and things like that. And then so while I was writing Atlantean Wavelengths, I was watching a lot of um like Atlantis themed movies, like obscure movies,
yeah.
and those the themes from those and like the motifs like were found their way into my work. And so there are like references to um a lot of those things are what I'm watching. One of the um movies that I found somewhat inspiring was like this obscure Italian spy movie from the 60s called Operation Atlantis,
Hmm.
which if you look, you can probably find to watch online. I know um it's on like Amazon Prime or one of those, but it used to be the whole thing was on YouTube. I got like bought a bootleg DVD of it somewhere, and I used to watch it like hundreds of times. Like while I
Huh.
was writing, I would just watch it over and over. And basically, the plot of that movie is that this guy is like a I don't know, he's like a spy, but kind of like a low rent kind of James Bond type, and he's just like kind of a I don't know. You would say he's just like an average,
Yeah,
kind of like nobody that not that incredible of an agent or anything, just kind of a whatever. And so he gets like recruited on this job to go to this place where supposedly there are like people there claiming to be the survivors of Atlantis, and like this is the like in this mountain or whatever, this region, there's like this like the Atlanteans are there, and they're working on these weird bizarre weapons and things
yeah.
like that. And so like I don't want to give too much of it away, but it's like um I don't know, like thematically it was very interesting to me, and that's where I talk about like in the book, there are mentions of the survivors of Atlantis or something like that. The first poem actually, um which is called The Orphans of Atlantis, was originally titled The Survivors of Atlantis. But
Yeah,
I thought that was like, that orphans would be better because I felt like that was more how I felt, like an orphan.
definitely. It conveys more of that atomization again. That
Uh,
Atlantean mindset is like a much more sort of atomized thing in the world as it is, much less of a it's not like there's some secret group of people who are like of that mindset who are working together. It's much more atomized. What's interesting is and tell me if this resonates. I think there's kind of an interesting connection between this book, Atlantean Wavelengths, and Beatnik Fascism, in that I think there's some conceptual similarities. I feel like you're kind of talking about almost the same mentality of being a kind of elite, sort of aristocratic, radical type of outsider in both Beatnik Fascism and then Atlantean Wavelengths. And Beatnik Fascism, the name of it is more or less inspired from an episode of The Twilight Zone involving some aliens who kind of visit a small town in America in the guise of beatnik bikers. So it's that kind of mindset of like they are from somewhere else. They're perhaps a more evolved being, but they kind of are. We're among you disguised is very much like a message in beatnik fascism, and a kind of there's kind of a will to fight in that book, because this was from that 2016 2017 era of dissident right, where there was a lot of like hope that some of these trends in the dissident political sphere could actually change the world. I think that really comes across in beatnik fascism. Whereas Atlantean Wavelengths, it's still that same sense of being an elite outsider, but it's, as you said, it's less about kind of grouping up and fighting the establishment. It's a kind of more, how do we adapt to this the way that it is, and maybe the best hope is to kind of build something for ourselves and our loved ones and our like-minded people that perhaps divers of future generations would find. Does that resonate?
Yeah, almost there are a lot of parallels to beatnik fascism, just in the sense, and also the sense of like not even at that time period that it was written in 2015 or 2016, like there was the same sense of what I conveyed earlier, which is that like not really fitting in like politically, but then also like not fitting in with the politically dissident options, which was always very much an issue for me, even back then. And I think I had like a poem in beatnik fascism that I think was like really ahead of its time. Is that it said like the poem was like something like a movement magnified or something, and it was essentially like from far away, it looks like there's like a coherent, dissident consensus here, but like when you look closely, you see that they're like these people don't agree on anything. And I think that's like that really like turned out to be like what it is. And we can argue with you all day about like what forces had a role in like dividing and like pacifying these different groups and just kind of stirring up shit, whether it's like
well, you talked a little bit about it in Rats of Nationalism too.
Exactly. But then when Atlantean Wavelengths, it's the same kind of like alienation, but it's like it's in a way it's even it's like more positive. It's just kind of like you're just on your own, like but but that's okay, because like you can just go for it, man. Like you're on your own, but like
there's a joy. There can be a joy
just
to
adapt
that.
And survive. Like
I think both kind of the struggles described in Atlantean Wavelengths, as well as the joys, kind of reflect that mindset of you're on your own. How do you survive? And there's something to be said on both angles. I mean, it's definitely, the Atlantean Wavelengths is far from a negative book. There's a great romanticism in it too, which I like.
And like beatnik fascism was also, that was written at probably like my edgiest time period, for sure. So it's like even now, like people will send me poems and things from that book, and like Michael Anisimov like was like screenshotted one of them where like one of like my edgiest poems from that or something, that like and he's like, whatever happened to this guy, or something like that. And I didn't even remember writing it. I didn't even remember like, holy shit, I can't believe I would even write something like that. It was like something, I forget what it was. It was like a poem called like Matchbook Club or something. And it was like that, where they were like a match, ready to ignite, and so all this stuff. But that was very, the feeling. It was very kind of like, it had like a revolutionary like energy to it, which I don't have that anymore. And I think part of it is I'm also I don't know. I'm much less naive than I was at that time.
Yeah, but like yeah, but it's not just you. I think it's like the whole like everyone. I don't know. It just was such a different time. I was listening to some of the podcasts you did with Robert back then, and like some of the like the Fash Wave music from back then. It was
Right.
so long ago, but like enough people bought into the idea that like there was this change in the air with Trump and everything that I don't think anyone is really totally to blame for that. There was a sense that there was an opening there, and I think there really, in actuality, there wasn't, but that was just the energy of the time, you know.
Yeah, well, and I think that like part of the problem too was that there was a sense that there was this energy for like a new I don't know that for some there was some kind of like a revolutionary energy there, but when it got right down to it, like these people didn't even agree on the direction that things
Well,
needed to
definitely,
go.
yeah.
And
Well, that's another, yeah. Go on.
and still and still don't, in fact. But I mean, I think that also I was much more naive about the amount of subversion and things that go on in dissident circles, and like I became like more. I mean, like one time I've like, I met up with a girl one time and I found her LinkedIn, and it said she had worked for like Homeland Security and things like that. So
Yeah.
it was like, I just had like very limited knowledge of how rampant the kind of subversion was, and not just from like I don't mean like just from like feds and things like that necessarily, but like also the foreign influence. And I think that you certainly see that with like a lot of the dissident right is like kind of like the alienation that we have as political dissidents is like it's very much seen as something to be exploited by countries like Russia and China and things. So it's like
Yeah.
they exploit like our alienation to cause chaos in our country, but like for their benefit, like they don't actually care about that. And it's very like frustrating to see like a lot of the dissident right just like just wholly eat up all of these like clearly absurd like kind of like pro-Russia talking points.
Yeah,
And,
I
like,
remember you were kind of a holdout on the kind of Russia-Ukraine thing that is still going on, but no one's paying attention. But obviously from last year, I think he even got some Richard Spencer retweets off that because he was speaking similarly at the time, or still is.
Yeah, and that's like the thing, and I'm not even necessarily like that invested in the conflicts. I just don't like being used.
Yeah.
As a pawn. Like my I don't want my alienation to be like explored. I think that's like a Colin Liddell talks about this sometimes, that it's like it's a balance that like you have to find as a dissident, like being critical of your society, of your government, without allowing yourself to be like just used as a pawn to be like weaponized by some other country. Because when like I don't know, somebody from like Iran or Russia or somebody gets up and talks about how like they're based and the US is gay or something. I mean, it's just bait for like these people to just go for you to eat up and just like basically be a traitor to your country or something like that. And I don't know, it's just kind of like, it's almost like, if I came to that conclusion on my own, it would be fine, but I don't like being like pushed by like
and sort of
psyops.
Yeah,
and sort of like all of these kind of these super shady like influencers, like things like that. And when the Russia-Ukraine war started, you had all of these people like Anatoly Karlin and all these people who I used to know quite well, that were saying that like the Russia was going to take over the whole country in like 48 hours. Kiev was going to fall in 48 hours or something. All of these like these that were clearly like maybe they're not all necessarily like agents or something like that, but it's like they're like, why are these people? You have to wonder sometimes like why all of these accounts, like why are they tweeting in English, like for a Western audience, instead of like tweeting in Russian, like for their own people or something like that. Like I'm not going on like Russian social media and being like, hey guys, like Russia sucks. Here's why. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why there's a reason why they're like tweeting in English to an American audience, or to trying to influence Europeans or something like that. Now maybe they're not all agents or something like that, but you always have to keep in mind that it's like, well, these are people from other countries who have their own resentments toward the US, and they're like trying to to push you, but they're like really just patriots for their own country. Like they don't care about you. And I don't know, that's been like a big thing.
It's part of what you write about in Rats of Nationalism, and just that general theme of subversion. And I don't know, because you've been online so long, and I was going to say this at the intro, but like, so we obviously go back to 2018, but you have kind of like stark, like very early roots in this, which is cool. Just kind of an aside, you even famously, or actually not famously, but should be famously, vouched for Trump as early as 2011. Which people can go back and find. I may link that because it's kind of impressive that you saw around the curve with that. Where was I going with this? Just talking about how you've been online for a long time, but I think that kind of gives you a bit of a like 2020 vision on sort of like what the real dynamics of what are going on. Because when people kind of first join up on Twitter or whatever, it's easy to get blinded by like the trends of like, oh, this is cool, like this must be true because this account, which is really popular, is saying it. But you've kind of been around, Brandon, have been like around long enough to kind of see these things cycle through and the way that they work enough to have that longer term take on things, which I think is good.
Yeah. And also, like, I mean, I've often like been like way ahead of the curve on things like that. Like with Trump, with Trump in 2011, like, I could see what was happening because like I just simply like paid attention to what he was saying and the arguments that he was making, and which were like, which those things were in like 2016. Those things all like came to be like the central issues. I guess you could say the things that he was talking about in 2011 when he wasn't taking. When I endorsed him, I think in 2011, and he wasn't even taken seriously as a candidate
for
at that
2012.
Point. And so it's always been, and even like when I wrote The Rats of Nationalism, which is already kind of a dated book, filled with like errors and confusion, but now
interesting,
everybody talks about that stuff all the time now, like where it's like, the kinds of things I was talking about people talk about it all the time, and there's like, almost too much. So, but it's kind of like when, I've been online, like I've been blogging since 2001. So like,
that's good. Yeah.
That's when I started blogging. My first blog post, like I think officially, was like me writing about going to the mall to see the Princess Diaries, and like they wouldn't let me, like I had a big thing of Diet Pepsi and they wouldn't let me bring it in the theater. So me and my friend, like, instead of like, we just like snuck into the theater from outside the building, and then so I was able to bring my Diet Pepsi in to watch the Princess Diaries, and that was like my first ever blog post. That was pre 9/11, so those were the last kind of days of innocence before like, before the shit hit the fan. I always believe that like that the 90s really ended in when 9/11 happened. Because that was when the entire dynamic changed to like this weird kind of confrontational, like almost warlike. I mean, you could even say that maybe the 90s ended like with the 2000 election, like the recount and all of that. But I really feel like 9/11 was when like things were like,
oh yeah, no doubt.
Things just like everything was just, the whole attitude with fashion, like everything was just different. The whole vibe was like, so it was so much like before that, like in the 90s, like people didn't talk politics, but suddenly you'd be at parties and stuff and people would be like arguing about like the Iraq war and things like that in bars and stuff like that, which, in like 1999 and stuff, when it was just fucking like, Backstreet Boys and all Britney Spears and all that shit, like nobody gave a fuck about anything. So it was like, I don't know. But yeah, I've been online for like a really long time, and I've been blogging since 2001. I'm actually like, you know, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I've got nothing left in the tank, you know. But
But you keep it going, yeah.
Yeah. So, but you know, and another thing with the like the subversion stuff is the way that like you have to look at it is, the U.S. constantly would like, you know, props up dissidents in places like Iran and Russia and stuff. Like they kind of create and promote these dissident figures that are, you know, critical or whatever. And like, so you have to like realize that other countries are doing the same thing with people in the U.S. that are critical of our government. And in fact, in like the early days of the alt-right, and this is like much more evident in hindsight now, you had these sites like Russia Today and stuff that were like promoting like alt-right figures. I think like Richard Spencer was interviewed by them, like his first big interview, and I have been like mentioned in articles before, like they've like featured my tweets and things like that in different articles, and they were like various like alt-right figures that were actually like writing for some of those publications. And I don't know, I never had any interest in it because I never like, I don't know, you could say that I maybe I kind of fed into it a little bit with my like, you know, like promoting like non-interventionism and things like that. So that could be like beneficial to, you know, perceived as beneficial. But I was never like into the whole Putin is based. I always thought that like the kind of like the like Russian like, you know, machismo and all of that. Like I always thought that was like so corny and like lame, and just kind of like backward. So so I don't know, that none of that ever resonated with me, but it obviously resonates with like a lot of the dissident right kind of like, I don't know, like the gym bro kind, like the bro right, which is like, I don't know, I like, you know, I consider a lot of those people that are like really misguided because it's like they think like, oh, you just eat and lift weights and get ready for like, it's like you know, the country is like, and it's not going, the future is not going to be won by like, you know, in that way. It's like you're just, the best thing you're going to become like a bouncer at a bar, basically. You're not going to be like, you know, somebody like Zuckerberg and these people that are just kind of like, yeah, maybe they don't like, they're the ones that are like, you know, getting real power, like big deal. You can lift weights and you can like stand in front of the mirror and take selfies or whatever. But like, you know, you're not going to be like wielding a sword and
no.
So
sure. Well, I like what you've said is like, you know, you have these issues with different factions of the dissident right, but you're also kind of friendly with people. I know almost every different faction. I feel like kind of, and this ties into probably what led you to a space like the dissident right in the first place, but even within it, it's kind of this aversion to these bigger groups that make you kind of sign up for different you know, bullshit ideologies or like I don't know, even with altleft.com used to kind of talk about how like, you know, why just because I believe X, Y, and Z things about immigration or whatever, like why should I also sign on to this other like, you know, trad stuff or like stuff about the environment. I feel like there's always a kind of willpower in your work to like not be lumped in, but instead kind of take every issue on its own, and like also that's the way you deal with individuals as well, I feel.
Yeah, completely. I mean, even like you know, there are a lot of people in distant political movements that if they don't like someone or somebody's from like a certain political faction, like they will like anything the person says, they will like almost like intrinsically disagree and attack them just because they're in a different faction. Even people that like I don't, you know, that I'm blocked by or that I, you know, am not particularly a fan of. Sometimes like Bronze Age pervert will say things and I'll be like, yeah, you know, he's right on there. I completely agree with that. And sometimes like
or Fuentes,
Nick Fuentes, like sometimes, and it's almost, it's what's amusing is it almost always happens when it's like it's something that like the majority of people rally around to attack a person over is like the one time that they're saying something that I agree with. You know, this happens with like Fuentes frequently, and it's like, people freaking out over something he says that is just, in my mind, is just like the plain truth of the matter. Same thing with Bronze Age pervert, the things that people freak out at him about sometimes. And Spencer, certainly Spencer.
Yeah.
And just all of these different people. And I also have like very much a strong personal loyalty, especially to people that I have been friendly with for many years. So it's almost like, some of these people that were around in the 2015 or whatever, like they've all kind of gone on different trajectories and paths, but like, I don't really hold that against any of them. It's like, I kind of feel like, we were all there. We kind of like, we fought the wars, so to speak. Like we were in the mix, and like we all lived through this particularly intense and bizarre time period of politics that we were a part of. And it's kind of like, so, people will say that like, oh, why, how come like you still talk, like Spencer's so cringe now, how can you talk? And it's like, man, I don't care. Like, I don't, it's like, who cares?
His trajectory is kind of interesting. And I heard he did this interview with that podcast, No Jumper. I don't know if you saw anything about that, but it's like a much more mainstream sort of source. And I thought he actually composed himself very well. And I don't agree with, I don't agree with a lot of his old stuff. I don't agree with a lot of his new stuff, but he makes sense when he talks a lot of the time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff he says that I don't agree with, but it's just kind of funny how like there's always this pressure to like just disavow people and things like that. And it's just kind of like, I'm just kind of stubborn, and I just like don't do that. But people always assume, like people would always attack me because they would think like, oh, this guy's an Apollonian. He's because I would follow Mark Brahman or something, which is like, no, I'm actually not an Apollonian. I've never been. I wouldn't say I'm not really like I'm not an Apollonian. I'm not a Spencerite. Like I didn't vote for Biden. I voted for Trump both times. Like I didn't.
Yeah.
So it's just there's this idea that like you're part of this, and I have another friend who's like who was really active back in 2015. And now he's like prominent in Nick Fuentes circles. Like, he's gone on that kind of trajectory. And it's like, it's just like, if I'm like loyal to someone, if they've been around, if they were around back then, and like, we made it this far, like still being cool, like, just like, who cares, man? Just
exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Well, I just ignore it if they post something I disagree with. Like,
exactly. No, I think that makes sense. There's that loyalty element, which is good. The one thing I was going to kind of highlight at the beginning of the show is that one of your I guess maybe not as long term, but someone I associate with you online is Brendan Lusso, formerly known as Gorgonzola Man. You went on his I haven't heard this yet, but you did an in-person Tales from the Mall with him recently, right?
Yeah, and I was on his podcast once before, like 2 years ago.
Right. Oh yeah, I did hear that one. So yeah, case in point, he comes from a different kind of background entirely, but very much on your wavelength in terms of being like a mall rat and also living in Phoenix. So makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and also like, and this is another thing that I think is like personality has always been a really like big thing to me, because like so many people in like these dissident circles just have like absolutely terrible personalities. So like I can like, even if I don't agree on someone with a lot of stuff, like, it's just like, oh, thank God this person has like a good personality. It's like, it's fun. I don't even care. Whereas like there are people that like, that I agree with like 100%, that I would be like absolutely terrified to meet up with in person, or like, and I think this is like actually like is kind of this is also kind of, I think, relates to politics in a way, and kind of my disillusion with it, because like even if you was like, when I was like edgy, like kind of like on the periphery, like of like white nationalism and things like that, and the dissident right, it's like sometimes I would wonder to myself, well, like, but like, what's the point of me if I wouldn't even want to live in the same neighborhood as these people? I wouldn't want to. So like, how can I like band together with these people for like this mass movement that's going to, if I wouldn't even like want to hang out with them or like live in the same neighborhood, or anything like that, because a lot of them are just so surly and just
Insane.
nasty and sadistic. Like even the way that I don't know, even the way that I see them attack certain people online is just kind of it's so scuzzy to me, and also makes me feel guilty, because it's oh, when I used to get angry and stuff online, was I ever that fucking nasty?
Well, probably not, but yeah, no, I get the idea for sure. Yeah. Well, before moving on from Atlantean wavelengths, I do want to talk a little bit more about astrology. You got to, as we talked about, there's kind of an astrological dimension to the whole book, recurring themes, and you've written about this stuff elsewhere. There's a great poem in Atlantean wavelengths called Fabric of Astrology, where you kind of lay out, I guess, your views on this in a poetic manner. But it's interesting because you're basically an atheist, right? But you kind of believe pretty sincerely in a lot of elements of astrology. And I say this sympathetically. I'm kind of become more interested in astrology recently myself.
Yeah, well, I would say that that I'm an atheist, but you could also say that I'm agnostic. I would say, yeah, my religious views are even if I can see the arguments for why people would think that there's an intelligence, behind the universe or something. It's just my feeling is that okay, well, even if the universe was created by something intelligent, it's for me there's perhaps our minds aren't evolved to perceive it, or we don't, whatever the case may be. I don't see any sense in definitively making claims about the nature of what that intelligence is, or what it wants, or what how it wants to be worshipped, or whether it even should be worshipped, whether it wants to be worshipped, or what if it's good or bad, or if it's if it's neither, if it's kind of amoral. I don't see anything in any need to make these really definitive claims about this is exactly what it wants. And so it's people take this leap where it's aha, look at this tree or something like that. That means that the universe was created by something. And then it's okay, but how do you go from that to saying that the 10 commandments are the word of God or something? Right. It's kind of it's a leap I'm not willing to make. And so I would say that I'm not I recognize that I think that there are limits to human consciousness, and there are things we can't, we may only be perceiving a small amount of reality. In the same way that a mouse or something, it can't talk, but it doesn't even know what talking is, or something like that. So it's it doesn't even know what it doesn't know. So I'm conscious that could be the case, but it's just simpler to just say that you're an atheist, because I find that it just is I don't know. It's a distinction without a difference to someone who's a true believer. It's blasphemous to even not recognize whatever they claim the truth is, in any capacity. So so in terms of astrology, I don't know, I believe in astrology in the sense that I do believe that people's moods and things are affected by the planets, and I mean, you could say environmental forces, really, the moon affects the tides and these kinds of things. They really do. It's saying that the weather doesn't affect your mood, because really the weather is just a microcosm of these I don't know, forces, I guess you would say.
No, completely. No, I try to think about it sort of scientifically like that as well. And you can kind of, the energy of the moon, as it were, especially I guess in theory, especially as a Cancer, you're supposed to feel that, right?
Well, right, but that brings me to my next point, which is what I really believe is why astrology is useful. Number one, it's I think it's useful just as as a metaphor, and I like it aesthetically, as a simple form of symbolism, similar to maybe how some people might view religion, maybe some of the less believing factions. but I think that from a sociological standpoint, astrology is useful because, like, if somebody like tells you that they're a Sagittarius or they're a Scorpio or something like that, you can infer from that person has probably absorbed like characteristics that are associated with those signs just because they themselves are interested in it. So it's like, you see this online all the time where like a girl will be like, well, I'm a Pisces, so that's why I'm like this or something like that. So it's like from a very
it reinforces age,
from like they've absorbed some of these characteristics just by the fact that like from an early age of like reading about their sign and knowing what their sign is and all this stuff, that they've kind of like they've manifested those characteristics of like, oh, I am a Cancer, so like therefore I'm kind of introverted and I have like a thick shell and I don't like let people in. So it's kind of like it doesn't even matter if it's like on the cosmic level that it's like bullshit. What matters is that like, that person is, you can know something about that person just by the fact that they're interested in.
Definitely.
So that's basically my belief in astrology. Whether or not like, the moment that you're born on a certain day, 30 years ago or something, like affects your personality for life or something. I doubt that I doubt that there's any real truth to that, but I think that it also is like, it doesn't matter, because if you've been from 5 years old, you've been reading your horoscope and thinking that like, you're a Leo and therefore you're like a lion and you act this way and you're extroverted and all this stuff, then it's like, if somebody tells you they're a Leo, then you could be like, oh, maybe we're not compatible because this person is probably absorbed these characteristics, and they will just like, you will, if somebody else believes in astrology, they're going to be like, that's going to be an obstacle. Like if your signs are incompatible or something, even if it is bullshit, it's like the person in their mind has already said that, like,
so that's,
it can never work because this person is this or something like that, even if it seems ridiculous.
No, it's interesting. I remember you always kind of posted about it, and I always assumed it was pretty aesthetic based, which I think it partially is. You kind of like the aesthetics of it, as do I, but I liked in Fabric of Astrology, the poem in Atlantean Wavelengths, how you sort of unpack, the effects on your life that it can have. And I thought that was cool. And I also, I don't know if this is a leap, but also obviously astrology is in the planets are kind of have attributions which are also tied in with various gods. So it kind of tied for me in general with that sort of light paganism that you have sort of aesthetically, as with the theme of Atlantis even.
Absolutely. And there's also, I think that there's also an almost like a timeless quality about it, because you can see like like astrology in very like classical times, and then but it's also, you could even see it in like more futuristic incantations like Battlestar Galactica or something like that. Where it's like it's almost like a timeless kind of metaphor. And I think that there is a certain kind of and this ties in with the book a little bit, where there's I perceive like a certain kind of heroism involved in the defiance of like the forces and the stars and all of this. There's kind of like in overcoming that, there's just like certain kind of heroism, even if it's something as simplistic as like, well, it says right here that our charts are incompatible, but like, I'm going to find a way, or something like that. By sheer will, just sheer passion, overcome this or something. I think that there's something heroic in that as like a metaphor. So that's what it's kind of like a motif, also.
Definitely. All right. Well, we're rounding out a couple hours here, so we should probably wrap it up soon. But I did, I'll let you kind of promote anything you want to promote or say. I also wanted to bring up television. Briefly. I've always kind of appreciated your fanship of Melrose Place. Have you revisited that anytime recently?
Not in the last few years, but like, I kind of cycle through different old favorite shows. Like Melrose Place was a very kind of is a show like as almost like as superficial as it is. It is very like much of a coming of age
Yeah.
show because when I was like when I got my first apartment, it was like in a just these ghetto apartments in Phoenix, and it just came with like basic cable, and so the
Hmm.
only channels that I got for cable with this apartment were the Family Channel, C-SPAN, I think like CNN, and the E channel, right?
Yeah.
So like of those, like the E channel was the most compelling at the time, and on the E channel they would show reruns of all the time. In the morning they would show like, and this was kind of epic for me. They had this segment called Old Faves, and they would show reruns like of WKRP in Cincinnati, One Day at a Time, and Alice.
Yeah.
And so I would get up at like 5 in the morning to watch those. But they also showed reruns of Melrose Place
Hmm.
every day, like twice a day, like once in the morning and then once at night. And um, so in the show, Melrose Place was still on at the time. They just were already like syndicating reruns.
Yeah.
And because it was on every day, like I became very much like I don't know, like captivated by this
Yeah.
show
Well,
because
that's
it was
kind of my
watching.
experience of watching it when I watched on Hulu. Just like, man, this isn't the best show on earth, but it's got that soap opera element of really sucking you in. It gets pretty outrageous pretty fast.
Yeah, yeah, it gets like it gets outrageous, but it's also like at the time period I was watching it, like I was like very much like alone, so I became really obsessed with like the show's characters and things, and like
Yeah.
I would like I'd write songs about the
Right.
characters
Well,
on
I
the show.
know, yeah, right back where I started from Your Birthday Boy
Yeah,
album from
that was
1996. Yeah.
recorded in '96, like while I was watching, and it was all about the trajectory of like the
Michael.
character Michael, who was always my favorite character on the show. Um,
Yeah, his love life is one of the most, it's kind of like once that starts going awry at the end of season one, I guess, that's when the show kind of really starts. It goes to some pretty insane places. But yeah.
yeah, and like I don't know, I always like the reason why I always found the character Michael so compelling is that like he was kind of like, I wouldn't say that he was like the villain of the show, but he was like kind of like he was portrayed as like really not a kind of like a snake, not a
Yeah.
very good guy really. But like there are moments in the show where he has these kind of heroic good deeds or these heroic
Yeah.
moments that you're just like those are like the best parts of the show. And I kind of wrote a little bit about this in a book I was recently working on that revisits some of that time period, and
Hmm.
like and it kind of even ties in with Atlantean wavelengths a little bit, where like the best parts of the show are the ones like where you find like as people, right, that
Hmm.
they continuously like like our nature, like as our personalities and everything, like we try, but we continuously fall in the same traps and make the same mistakes, and keep falling the same pitfalls like over and over. We keep in relationships or whatnot, we keep finding ourselves in the same predicaments over and over. And like
Yeah.
the true moments of like personal heroism are found those moments when we're able to overcome even briefly
The
like
cycle.
what our nature is, like what our personality is, what our like
Yeah. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
our hangups are or something like that. And like that was very much like how I felt about Melrose Place. And those are the best moments of the show, are when the characters, even if you take like Matt or Jake or any of these people, they have their moments of where they just like they
Transcend.
have, yeah, they're able to transcend their their nature, however
well,
neatly.
ties really neatly into what you were saying about astrology a moment ago, where it's like there is so much that's determined, yet there's that little spark of freedom, like genuine freedom that people have to overcome what otherwise would seem like a predestined path. And I do think TV, especially like episodic or serialized TV, can be an interesting place to explore this. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with like Sean Partridge in the Partridge Family and all that, kind of
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about that too. I jokingly, but also seriously, I think like the archetypes of television as being actually these ancient, sort of astrological things. And it's almost a satirical religion, the Partridge Family Temple, but at the same time, I think there's really something to that.
Yeah, and I think like I've always found that group of people interesting because they were like just slightly like before my time, but I always found it interesting that like independently, like I came to to have very similar conclusions and mindset about a lot of like that a lot of these people did, kind of like even with something like beatnik fascism. I think like Boyd Rice had that album Hatesville, which
very
had like
similar, yeah,
kind of a similar thing. And and people might think like, oh, that was like you kind of copied that, but no, it was I didn't even like know about it really until I was like was like almost finished with that book, and I was looking at that stuff and like, but just a lot of that stuff with that whole circle of people. I think maybe it's because like like our generation, I think like they're like a little bit older than I am, but at the same time, I think there's that very, but I came to a lot of the same conclusions as them. And so sometimes I feel like, well, like
it kind of validates it. Yeah.
Well, it validates it, but it's also like, like things are so much worse because like the stuff that these guys were saying, like, was like I grew up too late or something, because like I should have been I would have been like thriving in this scene. And like now it's like we've gone downhill from we've gone downhill from this kind of like, even when I would watch like these like, cable access stuff with these people from the early 90s and stuff on reruns, I think like, oh, these people are saying exactly like what I'm saying now, but like they had a whole scene, of like that. And it's just like, so I just like, I grew up too late or something. I should have been part of that. And like, now I'm just kind of on my own here, where these other people are into, I don't know, all of this other stuff like Red Scare and
well, yeah, I was gonna actually ask about that, because it's like in a way, and maybe you disagree with this, but in a way it kind of feels like there is a cultural scene where there, not beatnik fascism, but there is a kind of like dissident right like a hipster flirtation with the dissident right that you kind of almost were prescient about with beatnik fascism in 2015, 2016. Because when I first kind of started getting online, I always was enthusiastic about that idea too. Like, oh, like there's going to be like Swipple, like based people. And I do think it's kind of come true. But also the messaging has changed a lot. And there's a lot of, I don't even want to speculate, but, people talking about teal bucks and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know, you kind of have a more negative take on, but also like just acknowledging like it is a little bit like what you were talking about, maybe.
Right. There is like, there is the scene, like the scene did materialize of like that kind of hipster right or whatever. It just so happens that like, like the worldview and like the ideological stuff is just like, it's not really anything that like that I find compelling, as opposed to what like Boyd Rice and all of these people were doing. Like they were on the same, like I was on the same page as like what the stuff that they were talking about in those days. But it's like, it did materialize, but like, it didn't materialize in any kind of fashion that like I'm interested in, really. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's just it's just whatever. Like I never had any interest in any of the stuff like, the kind of like the Brooklyn dissident scene or whatever. Like I don't even like New York, really. Like I don't like New York culture. I don't like, I never liked any of that stuff. I didn't like it. I didn't like the anti-woke left or something. And this is nothing about like any of these like specific people or anything. It's just kind of like, there was a time when I thought I identified with the dissident, the direction that things were going. And I just like, I don't find any of it like, it doesn't, the directions that it has gone in, like maybe it's more successful, but it just doesn't none of this stuff interests me like at all.
Could you imagine, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, could you imagine it kind of recoagulating around something that you do believe in more? Do you, at this point, do you think it's just such a Tower of Babel thing that you're kind of more just checked out?
Yeah, I don't think so. Cause like one of the things that like, I think I came to realize is that, I don't know, maybe the things that I believe or these things that there's basically kind of like an invisible glass ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
On dissident politics, where it's like, where whenever like something gets to like reaches a critical mass, like there are kind of, and like I don't want to sound like conspiratorial, but there are basically like forces in place that can like disrupt and pacify these things and channel them into other things that are like, kind of like almost like a divide and conquer. It's like, oh, this is getting kind of big now. We need to do something about that, and like let's push people to this. And I think that there was like kind of a, you can attribute that to sinister forces, or you can just say that that's just like, what happens when something gets popular. It just starts to kind of suck, like or something like that. So I don't really know, but I feel like, the people who are sincere, or that maybe they believe the same things that I do or something, like, you're just never going to get past a certain point without being disrupted. And like I talk about, those of us who are sincere, like people would like, I've been told that, like, I won't say like by who or anything, but that they would be like farming content from people like us for years, like the sincere people, because people who are like disrupting these movements, or who are, I don't know, involved in like maybe finding talking points and things like that. So many of these like bot accounts and shill accounts and like influencers, like they have to get like, like talking points and things like that. And they can easily get those things from sincere people's blogs and their tweets and stuff. They're just farming content for, for things and ideas and things like that. And so they can like farm it, but change it. So that it can be used like in some other way or something like that. Yeah. And this is like another reason why I just like have become more, I would say, more closed off or secretive, is because then I can just like, I don't have people constantly copying like my tweets and my aesthetic and things like that. Like even when I would be like, even something as stupid as like talking about like, Diet Coke or malls or fast food or anything like this, like, then you start to see like people everywhere like adopting all this stuff, but like but using it for like things I don't believe in or something like that. And that certainly happened when I was doing a lot of like the alt left related content. Then it happens like no matter what stupid thing that we write about, somebody will adopt it as like a motif, or like, some kind of movie that I'm writing about or something like that. And I don't know how much of that is attributed to like sinister forces, but I do know that if you are sincere in these movements and you are like putting out a lot of ideological content and things like that, and that people will farm that content, and it will find its way into like other influencers who get propped up and essentially like using your ideas.
Definitely. It kind of not to open up a whole can of worms, but I was definitely thinking about some of the podcasts we used to do about Andrew Yang and that whole moment in 2019, which, I mean, I don't know if there was like, you hear people talk about like that being potentially sort of what's the word, astroturfed, or
Oh,
like
it
for,
absolutely was, and
yeah,
that is like, that's actually like provable one, because there are like there are actually spreadsheets of
oh
available
really,
of like of all of the accounts that were like involved in astroturfing, and some of them are actually some kind of like eye-opening uh,
I should check into
neighborhood
that. Yeah,
or
I'm not,
accounts.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, so like that was definitely an astroturf. I think like essentially meant it may have been astroturfed on multiple levels, like, but
Yeah,
astroturfed by like the Yang people, but also like elements that were looking to divide the far right. And
yeah,
so I don't know, I got sucked into that. But for me, it's the same thing where it goes back to Trump and all of this other stuff. Like, I was interested in Yang because like, he was like we were all like artists and stuff, so it's like I just want $1,000 a month.
I know. Well, that's what I wanted to say, because it still remains, even though I do think there's this sinister, sketchy thing about the Yang campaign, and he himself has kind of been less than thrilling as a continued voice in American politics. The
Yeah,
fundamental idea remains good, and I still think kind of almost up your alley a little bit, where it's, yeah, like I think you were about to say this, like as an artist, the idea of $1,000 a month, sort of facilitating that. It facilitates the kind of lifestyle you sort of talk about in all of your work, and including Atlantean Wavelengths. It's like that $1,000 a month is enough to check out, is enough to kind of be left alone. It kind of frees you from that slave morality about working that we were also talking about. And that, I think, remains a pretty potent political idea, and
yeah.
one that maybe not Yang Gang, but one that I hope we can continued. I want to see an idea like that come back, because I think it's kind of fundamental, like the being just freed from a lot of this bullshit.
Well, yeah, freed from it, but also like it's this kind of, it's similar to my other. It's like, what's in it for me, and it's like,
Yeah,
you know, like Yang was
$1,000 a
offering
month. Yeah,
$1,000 a month. Like, that's more than I'm getting from anyone else. Like, it's it's this benefits me personally, and that's like almost how I feel politically. I've almost done like a kind of back to the back to the kind of like analogy I used before of like the 60s versus the 80s boomers. It's like, at this point, it's like, just give me like a generic Republican who's just going to lower my taxes, and like,
yeah.
that's like, I don't care about all of this other shit anymore, because I don't see anything like meaningful happening from it. So it's just like, I just want to vote for someone who's like, who's not a complete buffoon and just going to lower my taxes and just be kind of boring,
Yeah.
And like, I think that a lot of people that are still in the kind of 2016 milieu, they're looking to like recreate the energy of 2016 or something. I don't think
It's
that
not
they
gonna
realize
happen.
that like, well, I don't think that they realize that like people aren't looking for that anymore. Like, I think one of the reasons, I think, why like Biden was kind of seen as, is because he was kind of like a boring kind of return to normal. Now it turned out that he's just like, he's so like senile and like buffoonish at this point, and like, that it's disturbing that he can't, and he's also like, I don't know, he's not that figure. But I think that like,
That was the hope. Yeah.
people just want like, they don't want this kind of like, crazy like Kanye West energy. And I've heard like Richard Spencer talk about like that this is the future or something like that. And I'm thinking like, no, I think that like people want like, people just
People
want
don't want
something,
to have to think about politics all the time.
or
Yeah.
they just like, I just want somebody who's like competent and like, emotionally stable and like just kind of boring. That's just going to like get down to the nitty gritty of like, policy, and like keeping the trains moving, and like,
Keeping
just
the water
lower,
running. You mentioned
yeah,
that.
like
Yeah.
lower
Yeah.
lower my taxes. And like, I just want someone who's like not going to fuck up my personal shit,
Yeah, it makes
like,
sense.
um
But
so
through it all, you occasionally still throw Trump a positive tweet, huh?
yeah, I do. And I think
There's
part
still
of
something
that is,
likable about him. Yeah.
well, and also it's kind of this thing before where like people like people attack him for stuff that is like when are like the times that I think he's making sense, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like, well, you see this a lot. I'm like, well, this right talking like about how like, how he facilitated like COVID and the vaccines and all that stuff. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, that actually like kind of works in his favor,
Yeah.
like, I'm not like, I was never this person like, for me, like I never disliked the lockdowns were like some of the best times of my life. So for other people,
Yeah.
it was like it was a nightmare or something. It was like hell on earth. But for me, like, I mean, it was like, as someone who's like generally like kind of a loner, anyways, who just like maybe just like only wants to like, just hangs out with his girlfriend and stuff and goes to the mall. Like I was like, we got free money. Like we just like I put it all in crypto. I just hung out and I watched movies all day, like the same movie over and over, and just like I could go out places and there was just like there wasn't like people all over the goddamn place. Like it was, I mean, yeah, it was like I thrived and like
I kind of did too, I have to say.
loners like yeah, like loners or independent people thrived in this. Like I didn't need to be like go out and be like, oh, but I can't go and eat at my favorite restaurant and sit. It's like I don't know. I just think the whole thing was just so overblown. It was like, okay, for like for like 3 weeks, like you had to order your food like, to go instead of for here or something. Like I don't remember it being like that. I don't know, that big of like something that really kind of, I don't remember it being something that was like really kind of was difficult or anything like that. But maybe
I mean, there's worse some places than others, but yeah.
I mean, I don't know. So it's like, but so I do kind of like Trump. I think that it's a mistake for Trump to just like, he kind of like is a victim of his own personality because the people that are fans of him are just like a lot of them are just like totally fucking bonkers. And so like, but he like, but because they praise him or whatever, he just allows those people like, like who is that, the My Pillow guy, and then all of these other people like Carrie Lake and all of these people that's just kind of like he himself like doesn't even believe the things that these people believe, but they've like latched onto him just because they've like he's supposed to be crazy and revolutionary or something. But like if you actually hear what his actual beliefs are, they're just kind of like they're fairly like just sensible like normie kind of Republican or like 90s Democrat beliefs or something like that. And occasionally he says a lot of outrageous stuff, but he's not like he doesn't even have the same beliefs as these people like Candace Owens or something that have like that are just
latched on him,
that are associated with him in the public consciousness. Like he doesn't even agree with them on like fundamental issues. So I don't know. It just comes back to where for me, like whether it's Yang or Trump or some other influence on like I just listen to what they say, and it's like so I don't know. I'd still like vote for Trump again just because I don't know, just like the just because.
So people can find your work at chatbooks.net. Your Twitter is private, but so I don't know, I won't necessarily tag that here, but people can find your work and the right people will come across it.
Yeah, I mean, you can tag my Twitter at Brandon Adamson.
Yeah.
I don't normally accept most people who try to follow me unless I know them or unless they just like so I don't know, probably like 1 out of every 20 people I accept or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, just like I constantly get people who try to follow me, and this has always been frustrating for me, but I'll just look at their page and it's like clear that we have absolutely nothing in common, and that they're essentially like, I mean, it's a little bit dramatic to say that they're my enemy or something, but it's just like I just look at their bio and their first 10 tweets, and it's just like this person doesn't understand the first thing about like what I like. Why on earth would they be wanting to follow me? Like, except just as a hater too. That's actually one of the most frustrating things about writing about dissident politics for me, is that you realize that people will be, quote, fans and like follow you for many, many years, but like, and they'll read your stuff and they'll like it, but it's clear that they don't even understand your fundamental beliefs. Like they don't even understand. But I have people following me since like 2015, or that they don't even like, they're completely like misperceiving like what my basic beliefs are, or things like fundamental beliefs are. And it's just like, as a writer, you can like, people's just, their reading comprehension is just so poor that it's just kind of like, it's frustrating, because you'd be like, and this is why I started my like blog post, just started to get more and more like bizarre and abstract, is because I came to this realization that like, it doesn't even matter what you write, because people aren't even going to understand it. So you might as well just write like nonsense almost, because it doesn't even matter like what you say or what you tweet. So it's like people don't even understand what you mean when if you construct an eloquent opinion perfectly, that like from a technical side, like it just lays it all out there what you believe, and people still won't even understand it. So it's better to just like tweet like, oh, I'm eating a I'm eating a croissant right now from Starbucks. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like people's perception of that will be like the same as like if you're writing something like really profound about making a profound political statement about what you believe. Like people's understanding of it will be like, it doesn't make any difference like what you write.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You kind of keep grounded in that other stuff. But well, hey, we should probably wrap up. I actually did want to. This is a very bizarre point to end on, but I did want to ask you about it. I was and we'll just end on this and drop the mic. But I was interested. This is about I've been wanting to bring you on New Right for a while. This is kind of overdue, and so this was about a year ago now. But you were tweeting a lot about Euphoria, which I also really enjoy, the show on HBO. It seems semi-ironic, perhaps, that you or perhaps even me would be into it, because it's kind of quote unquote degenerate. It's kind of ostensibly woke, but I think kind of below the surface. It falls in this pantheon of good TV we were talking about. Obviously, Melrose Place is not like good TV in a pretentious sense, but nevertheless, Euphoria kind of taps into that same wavelength for me. So just however briefly, I was kind of curious about how you got into Euphoria and if you dig the show, and however ironically that is given the subject matter.
I think like one of the main things is just that like I was dating a girl at the time, and like like dating girls that are like much younger than me, like I'm exposed to like a lot of pop culture related stuff, and I could just be like, oh, well, this sucks or whatever. But I've always like, I think it's better to be
open-minded
to
about
it. To be open-minded about it. I look at it as like an opportunity of something. And like, I don't know, like I'm like a pretty sleazy guy anyway. So like the stuff in Euphoria is not like, something where I'm going to be like, oh, this is degenerate or something like that. It's just kind of like, it is kind of amusing to me how it just like it's like, it basically encompasses like all of the kinds of quote degeneracy that like would really have people like, that really gets on people's nerves. It's just like, it's all in one show basically.
Yeah, it throws everything at the wall. I mean, there's an art to that.
And I don't know, I think that like I don't know, the thing about the show is that like I didn't really so I watched like all of it, and it's kind of, when you watch these shows like from a perspective of someone like you or me, like you kind of watch it like, in order to watch like a lot of contemporary film and TV and stuff, you often find yourself kind of like rooting for the characters you're not supposed to root for.
Yeah.
Like, and that was kind of like the way I felt.
Oh yeah, me too.
Like identifying with the characters that are like, that the show is trying to make you think are bad, but you don't want to identify with them too much, because then it's like you're presenting yourself with like a false choice. You're being presented with like a caricature of like, you're identifying with like kind of like how when people used to identify with like Archie Bunker, in All of the Family, where it's like he was like, he wasn't meant to be like a sympathetic character really. but like at the same time, when you like identify with him too much, then it's like you're identifying with like somebody who's like a caricature of what you're supposed to believe or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I felt about Euphoria, but it's also like, I think it's important to be, it's important to be open, like be open-minded to something, and like sometimes you just got to like sit through it and watch it. And I think that like Euphoria is like a fantastic show or anything? No, not really. But I think that whether it's like music or contemporary shows or anything like that, I think that they're like, it's very easy to just write it off and be like, this is all garbage.
No, there's a lot more going on there, I think. I think it's very well made. I kind of made the point to you when you were talking about it beforehand. Like it's got this kind of woke, it's like in woke garb, but actually the show is just very hedonistic. Obviously the characters in it are hedonistic, but like to watch it is kind of a pleasure in that way too. It's well edited. It's got, music drops and attractive people. Not everyone is attractive, but some of them, and it delivers on that, which is something that I feel like is actually shockingly rare now in culture. So I've always looked at it on that basis.
Yeah, and I don't know, and I do think it does like humanize a lot of the different types of people that you would very easily write off in real life as being, I don't know, it gives you kind of like a window into them, and does kind of create a feeling of empathy about different types of people and like what could be going on in their heads and stuff.
Yeah. It's that kind of character-driven show, like Melrose Place, where it's not a soap opera, but like I don't know, it has that's a real strength of like television storytelling. I feel like is being able to tap into that character-based storytelling.
Yeah, so I did watch it. I watched all the episodes, and I don't know. To me, I think it helps if you're dating a girl or something, like or if you, even if you have like younger friends or something, that they can almost kind of point you to things that are things from their era that are like that you may not have seen value in, but because you can understand like why what they see in it like helps you look at it a different way. And that's I
agree. Yeah.
And that goes for music and everything else. And like it's kind of like like I always hated like auto-tune in music.
Yeah.
Basically, but then I came to like understand like why this this girl, she said that like she liked it because it had like it like added like a hypnotic quality to the songs, or almost like,
oh yeah, no, and now it's like you almost get nostalgic for that in and of itself.
Yeah, and so it's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like other people can kind of help you if you're willing to be open-minded. You can look at these things and you can see like why other people find value in them that otherwise, as opposed to just writing something off as, well, this is trash or something like that, because other people are able to connect with it. It's important to like, to find out why, and then you
figure out
may,
what's going on. Yeah,
you may be able to connect with it on that level also.
Yeah, no, totally. All right, well, I think I'm going to stop the recording for now, but thanks so much for coming on. I will get this up within the next week or so, and I'm excited to get it up.